Chapter 475. The distance was getting closer and closer. The stench from the wolf's bloody mouth hit them in the face. The orc cavalry howled and rushed into the crowd in front of them. Hearing the cries and shouts, George turned his head and looked at his sister who was holding a child not far away. Without hesitation he clenched his weapon and rushed up. Behind him were the old, weak women and children. Once the wolf cavalry rushed in, it would be a massacre. As a trained militia he could not sit back and watch the tragedy happen. "Come with me. Men, stay and block them." George waved his weapon and went up. Several men with children around him also clenched their weapons and rushed up. There was fear in these people's eyes because they were facing a terrifying Mount Wolf cavalry. Not to mention the orc warriors above, even the Mount Wolves below were not something they could easily deal with. These ferocious beasts were the leaders of the wolf pack. The wolf that was bigger than a calf could easily deal with a real warrior. It was difficult for them who had only received militia training to defeat it. The ferocious smile of the orc appeared in front of them. The wolf just pounced and knocked over the man next to it. Then the crisp sound of bones breaking was heard. The wolf's bloody mouth bit off his throat. Fear was spreading. The crushing strength and the shadow of death made many people fearful. But no matter how scared they were, no one retreated in the end. Because they had no way to retreat. Behind them were a group of old, weak women and children. Their relatives were among them. As men they had to stand up even if they knew they would die. But even if they died, they had to fight to the last moment. A whoa! The mournful howls of the wolves reverberated in the air. The wolf cavalry was like a torrent that broke through the defensive formation in front of them. These ordinary militia could not stop them at all. In just the moment of collision, more than 10 militia fell to the ground. A wolf rider crossed their line of defense. The killing had awakened the bloodthirsty nature of the orcs. It rushed directly to a woman who was running away. Because she was carrying a child, she was too slow, so the wolf rider easily caught up with her. Sharp blades cut through the air. Facing the terrible enemy, the woman, who had no fighting experience, squatted down at the moment of contact. Her mother's instinct made her tightly protect the child, exposing her defenseless back to the enemy. A head flew into the air. The blood gushing out was accompanied by the mournful cries of the children. The half-orc cavalry laughed and waved their swords again. They had no sympathy for the alien races. Their bloodthirsty nature made them brave warriors, and such warriors were ruthless on the battlefield. The harsh living environment made them believe in natural selection. The weak could only be eliminated, even their own kind. The cold light appeared once again. It wasn't the first time they had slashed their swords at the crying children in front of them. As relatively stupid half-orcs, they also had a smart side, which was that the children of their enemies would become their new enemies when they grew up. The smell of blood filled the air. Sharp blades slashed through the air, and a massacre seemed to be about to take place. Swoosh! A sharp arrow flew out. The body of the half-orc cavalry stiffened for a moment, and then he fell off the wolf. The sharp arrow shot directly into its head, penetrating its skull in an instant. With a plop sound, the second arrow shot out, hitting the wolf's head in an instant, nailing it to the ground. Terrible strength. There seemed to be someone approaching in the darkness, and the speed was quite fast. Behind him, more figures appeared. Cold swords appeared. The wolf cavalry close to the crowd was instantly killed by the flying shadows. Their ferocious heads fell to the ground one by one. Even the ferocious wolves couldn't hold on for more than a second. Roar! Accompanied by a dull roar, a huge figure rushed out from the darkness. He was wearing heavy armor, and his eyes were bloodshot as he roared in excitement. Blood vessels that looked like earthworms appeared on his explosive muscles. This was a 3-meter-tall warrior. He seemed to be heavy, but his charging speed was extremely fast. In the blink of an eye, he rushed to the front of a wolf cavalry. Then he roared and swung the heavy anchor in his hand. The terrible power erupted with a dull roar. The wolf was directly smashed into meat paste with the half-orc cavalry on it. The half-orcs are just SOSO. The giant glanced at the frightened half-elves beside him, and a sinister smile appeared on his scarred mouth. Then he rushed up again. His huge body swung the heavy anchor as if he was entering and exiting a place where there was no one. Not a single wolf rider could withstand his attack. Often they would be smashed into a meat patty together with their wolves. Giant. The pirate leader under Soren. He wasn't very smart, but he was quite good as a fighter. He should be the pirate leader under Soren who was the closest to the legendary level. His lack of intelligence didn't affect Soren's use of him. With the blood of the swamp giant and the warrior's job as a barbarian, this guy with all brawn and no brain would rush to the front in any battle. Often he would break the enemy's defense line alone. Don't waste time. Scarface stabbed his sword into the wolf's throat. He turned to look at the giant next to him and said in a deep voice, "There are enemies approaching. They can't hold on for much longer. You go and help them deal with the half-orc army." A figure quickly approached in the darkness. Soren's elite pirates finally arrived. The wolf cavalry fell one by one. When they saw that something was wrong, they immediately tried to escape, but they were killed by arrows one by one. The giant roared and rushed up. Berserk. After his huge body approached the half-orc army, he didn't stop at all. He directly waved the anchor and rushed into the army from the side of the temple warriors. This time the orc army was thrown off their feet. "Giant! You idiot!" Scarface was so anxious that he stomped his feet. Helpless, he could only speed up and rush over. "This idiot! I let you support the temple warriors behind, not let you rush into the half-orc army alone." Scarface cursed in his heart, but at this time, he could only brace himself and go forward. Bang! With a shrill scream, the half-orc warrior's body was directly smashed out, and then he hit 7 or 8 people in a row, and then he fell to the ground and died. The giant relied on his full body armor. His strength was higher than Soren's in the state of transformation. Coupled with the giant's body advantage, he simply crushed all the half-orcs. The anchor used by a large warship was a complete killing machine on the battlefield. The half-orcs, who were known for their strength, were like a group of children in front of him. The heavy anchor roared past. The giant seemed to feel that this was not enough, so he directly threw the huge anchor in his hand. This time it was simply flesh and blood flying. The heavy anchor whistled past like a shadow, and it forcibly cleared a bloody line in the middle of the half-orc army. The more the giant killed, the more satisfied he became. The battle on land was much larger than the battle on the deck. He directly picked up the anchor again, and then swung it 360 degrees. In an instant, a vacuum area was cleared around him. Giant creatures were indeed a great killing machine on the battlefield. Just him alone seriously damaged the morale of the half-orcs. His huge body and huge weapon formed a complete crushing advantage, and in an instant the half-orc army was disrupted. In the darkness, sharp arrows were shot out like a storm. Soren calmly put an arrow on the bow, and every arrow took the life of an enemy. His figure moved at high speed in the night. As long as a target suspected of being an half-orc officer appeared, it would be greeted with a fatal arrow. The elven war bow could penetrate armor within a range of 300 meters. Soren's dark vision allowed him to be unaffected by the night. He was like a ghost wandering on the battlefield, calmly but fatally killing any dangerous targets. No one could hide from his sight and no one could avoid his arrows. After all, he had the blood of a half-elf. Chapter 476. Am I saved? George awkwardly pushed away the wolf that was on top of him and staggered to his feet. Cough. He coughed violently and felt weak all over. He seemed to have suffered a little internal injury. However, his battle record was also quite brilliant. As an ordinary person who had only received militia training, he actually killed a wolf alone. The battle in front was still going on, but more and more reinforcements appeared in the darkness. These were fierce-looking warriors. They had a stronger murderous aura than the regular army of Autumnfall. At first glance, they were elites who had experienced many desperate battles. The reinforcements finally arrived. Facing the ferocious orc army in front of them, the pirates under Soren's command were fearless. They even rushed up while screaming. Sir Soren was invincible. Victory after victory gave them the courage to face any enemy. Even if it was an abyssal demon in front of them, they would have the courage to face it head-on. Men should fight the enemy head-on. The high-spirited elite pirates directly divided into 2 teams and surrounded the enemy from both sides, ready to swallow the enemy in front of them in one breath. Why did they have to fight the orcs? Why did they think so much? Anyway, this was Soren's order. They just had to kill the orcs that were still standing in front of them. Demigod domain, pirate? Facing the elite pirates who finally arrived at the rear, a smile finally appeared at the corner of Soren's mouth. Then he looked at the orc army in front with cold eyes and did not hesitate to open pirate domain. An invisible divine domain spread out. In an instant, all the pirates seemed to have gone crazy. Their morale was so high that it was about to explode. If it was said that they were excited before, now it was a wailing and howling. Each of them seemed to be possessed by the god of war. All kinds of combat skills were used to kill a large number of enemies in an instant, and directly divided the orc army into 2 from the middle. Ugly Monkey's current state was very strange. He did not know what happened to him. Suddenly, his whole body seemed to have endless strength and his whole person was very excited. His pupils were slightly red, and his heart was beating much faster than before. His entire body was in a very strange state. Regardless of whether it was his hearing, sight, touch, or perception, all of them had reached unprecedented heights due to some kind of invisible force. Behind him were the corpses of half-orcs. Without exception, they were all killed in one blow. The ugly monkey felt as if it had been possessed by the soul of an assassin. The enemy's movements, positions, and flaws were all within his grasp. His excitement did not affect his rationality. Instead, it allowed him to unleash 120% of his strength. Around him, his companions seemed to be in a similar state. Each of them seemed to have been injected with chicken blood as they performed exceptionally well. Increased morale. The morale boost was equivalent to a level 6 spell, and the domain effect was similar to the greater bravery spell. The effect it would have on the battlefield was simply unimaginable. The elite pirates that rushed over flattened the half-orc army in front of them. At the end of the battle, it was almost a one-sided situation. The fighting spirit of the orc army was easily destroyed. Soren put away his elven warbow. Almost all of the orc officers were killed by him. If a demigod were to kill them personally, these guys would have no way to survive. Your Excellency. Scarface's figure appeared behind Soren. He knelt on one knee and said, "The orc army has been completely defeated? Do you want to kill them?" Soren turned around and glanced at him, then said in a deep voice, "Don't worry about them. Arrange for people to evacuate the civilians immediately. The real enemy is approaching. Let people cover the civilians' retreat. We will return to the range of the warship's cannons." Scarface nodded and said, "Yes." Someone arranged for the civilians to evacuate, and Soren looked into the distance. He felt that more enemies were approaching, and among them, there was an existence that he was quite afraid of. Eugene the Ascendant. Some unusually agile shadows were flying in the darkness. Soren's eyes flashed with a cold light and he said coldly, "They're fast." Whoa! A mournful wolf howl sounded. However, it was not a wolf that appeared, but a group of burly gnolls with black hair. Abyss gnolls. The servants of the gnoll king Yinagu. Black shadows flew past the periphery of the battlefield, but they did not rush over recklessly. Instead they stayed far behind them. These gnolls were very smart. They knew that they could not defeat so many enemies. A trace of killing intent appeared in Soren's eyes. He waved to the pirate leader beside him and disappeared into the shadows. Abyss gnolls. These monsters were dangerous. He had to get rid of them first. On the other side, the mighty orc army was approaching. A very tall giant gnoll with green eyes stood beside Eugene. It held a three-headed flail in its hand. At this moment its expression was very crazy. It roared, "We can't let these mortals go. You said that the parts of the divine artifact, Flail of Time, are in the hands of the half-elf church. That's the divine artifact that belongs to our Lord. We can't let these mortals take it away. Otherwise your tribe will suffer the wrath of our Lord." Eugene's eyes were cold. She silently looked at the crazy gnoll leader in front of her and said in a deep voice, "I will definitely do what I promised. The parts of the divine artifact will definitely be handed over to your Lord." The huge gnoll leader looked at Eugene with a cold and cruel expression. A cruel smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. He slowly said, "It better be so. In order to help you deal with the half-elves, many gnoll warriors have died in battle. If you still can't get the divine artifact, our Lord will definitely make you pay. His wrath is not something you can bear." Eugene was silent. As the demon lord who ruled the bottomless abyss, the strength of the Gnoll King was indeed not something that a mortal could resist. Not to mention that the Gnoll King had also conquered the Ghoul King, which was equivalent to facing the crazy revenge of two Abyss Lords at the same time. The Orc tribe could not bear such a heavy price. They had to get the parts of the divine artifact. Speed up. With Eugene's low roar, the Orc army suddenly sped up a lot and rushed forward. Eugene's gaze looked into the distance. The power of the ancestor's soul made her sense a powerful and dangerous existence, which made her feel a little uneasy. The god of the half-elves? Soren. This unfamiliar name made her feel deeply afraid. She had a hunch that a war was inevitable. We must get it back. Eugene clenched her fists silently. The gnolls were suspicious and fickle by nature. If the divine artifact was really gone, these ferocious beasts would definitely turn their backs on her. Blood. Drop by drop it fell. Soren's figure was hazy in the shadows. In front of him were the corpses of the gnolls lying on the ground. He looked at the corpses in front of him coldly. He directly reached out and picked up the tallest one of them. He frowned and carefully observed it. Abyss demon. Soren's expression was dignified. He murmured, not a gnoll from the material plane. Demon. There were two modes of reproduction in the bottomless abyss. One was the continuous evolution of the abyss worm. The demon's bloodline could mutate and eventually evolve into various creatures. The second was demon reproduction and demon hybridization. The demons that evolved from the abyss worm mated with the same kind of demons, or with other kinds of demons, and eventually produced new demons. There were also some outsiders in the bottomless abyss. But in the end, they would more or less be mixed with the blood of the demons, so the abyss species were very different from other species. Hybrid demon. Soren threw away the corpse in front of him and whispered, "It seems that there is a loophole in the barrier of the plane. Otherwise, the Gnoll King Yeenagu would not have sent so many gnolls from the abyss to the material plane. It should not be long before the invasion of the demons. The gnolls from the abyss appeared during the siege, and now there were so many of them. A small number of them could be explained by other reasons. But with so many of them, Soren was almost certain that the other party must have the passage from the bottomless abyss to the material plane. Demon Lord. Soren looked into the distance with a dignified face. Perhaps Eugene, the Ascendant, was not afraid of him in the form of the slaughter. But if the Gnoll King Yeenagu joined the fight, he had almost no chance of winning. Not to mention that the Gnoll King had also conquered the Ghoul King. Now he only hoped that the Demon Lord did not appear in the material plane. After all, the bottomless abyss was their headquarters. If he appeared, I reckon that there will be many Demon Lords who can't wait to overturn his lair, right? After all, this guy had always regarded the succubus Queen Mechanut as an enemy, and from time to time he would harass and attack her. The Gnoll King Yeenagu was a master at courting death. He not only regarded the succubus Queen Mechanut as an enemy, but also launched many attacks. At the same time, he was also a mortal enemy of the Tauren King, Buffett. The two sides had fought many times. But under such circumstances, he was still able to conquer the Ghoul King and successfully expand his territory. He didn't know if this guy was too lucky, or he was really not simple. Soren would not underestimate any living Abyss Lord. If they were dead, then so be it. Under the night sky, the orc army was speeding up. Eugene's figure suddenly stopped and looked in a certain direction. In an instant, he reached out and grabbed the white-boned spear behind him. A fierce murderous aura emerged. Eugene's whole body was like a taut bow, ready to fight at any time. Someone was watching them in the dark. The enemy did not approach. He observed them in the dark and then disappeared into the night again. Chapter 477. Closer, they were already very close. The night wind that blew in their faces seemed to carry moisture. They could hear the sound of flowing river ahead. After passing through a sparse forest, the scene before them appeared before the eyes of the exhausted refugees. Many of them had never seen such a large ship in their entire lives. In the Agate River, they could only see medium-sized ships at most. Such a large ship could only be used in the vast and boundless sea. The black cannons were aimed at the land, and the soldiers on the ships were ready to go. There were torches on all sides. They couldn't see how many ships there were, but there were probably more than 100 of them. In their field of vision, the entire river was filled with large ships. There was a faint fog surrounding the area, and a certain location seemed to be shrouded in fog. No one could see what was inside the fog in the dark, but it seemed like a dangerous monster, quietly watching everything in front of it, waiting for its master's call. Fortunately, the Agate River was as wide as the Yangtze and Yellow Rivers. Otherwise, Soren's fleet wouldn't be able to sail in. Quiet. A gentle female voice sounded. It was like a spring breeze blowing into everyone's ears. Then everyone quieted down. They didn't know why, but when they heard the gentle female voice, they couldn't help but calm down. They had just gone through a brutal battle. Even though they were still panicking, they couldn't help but calm down when they heard the gentle female voice. The Saint Priest Milan raised her head and looked in front of her. She saw a tall woman with a veil over her face. She had a very familiar aura. It was the power of divinity bestowed by the Lord. However, the woman was much stronger than her. Milan walked in front of the woman and gently twirled her skirt. She bowed her head and expressed her respect to the woman in front of her. High Priestess. The veiled woman smiled and nodded. The priests of the other churches looked at each other and hurriedly bowed their heads to show their respect. Although they still didn't know who the masked woman in front of them was, They could tell that she wasn't an ordinary person since her words had calmed everyone down. Let the women and children board the ship first. The veiled woman glanced at the people in front of her and slowly ordered. The men stay here and prepare. There is enough food on the shore. Let them share it with the others. Sixth Fleet, prepare for battle. The enemy may catch up to us at any time. Send the civilians to the cabin and equip the militia with weapons after they have eaten. The gentle voice seemed to have a magical power. The crowd in front of her actually automatically separated according to her orders. Then, the women and children were sent to the deck one by one and placed in the cabins of the battleship. There were basically no old people among these fleeing civilians. It was very difficult for old people to survive in the chaos of war. Most of them were women and children, and then there were the militia who believed in the half-elf god. During the siege, all the adult males were conscripted. Even the teenage boys were forced to learn some combat skills. Tell the pirates not to harass these civilians. The masked woman turned around and looked at the pirate leader behind her. She said coldly, "These are all believers of my lord. You should know how Sir Soren deals with people who break the rules." The pirate leader, who was missing his left ear, revealed a sinister smile and nodded, "Don't worry, your excellency. If anyone dares to mess around, I'll skin them myself." Cruel means of ruling. Soren's rule on the south coast was maintained by killing and order. Only those who had a brain problem knew what would happen if they disobeyed Sir Soren's orders. Sir Soren killed without blinking an eye. Steaming hot food was distributed. Some of it was prepared in advance, and the other part was dried meat and salted fish. There was plenty of meat in the prepared food. Most of it was fish in the sea. At this time, it was very satisfying to be able to fill one's stomach. Now that they could eat meat, many people felt a sense of happiness in their hearts. Even in peaceful times as civilians, they could add some meat during festivals. From what they saw in front of them, the food prepared by the reinforcements was very abundant. Meat accounted for a large proportion of the food. It seemed that the Lord's forces were really powerful. At least they were very rich. The old bishop and the priests next to him looked at each other. At this time they didn't care about their manners. They took a bowl of hot soup and wolfed it down with dried meat and salted fish. Autumn Fall had been besieged for a long time. There was not much food in the city, and some of it had to be distributed to a large number of refugees. Even the high-ranking priests could barely fill their stomachs during this time. Eat meat? If they let go of the moral taboo in their hearts, maybe there was a lot of meat in Autumn Fall. There were sounds of wolfing down food everywhere. At this time there should be a trace of chaos because of hunger and panic, but they didn't know why. When the voice of the masked woman sounded, everyone's heart was calm. They quietly and orderly received the food, and then after filling their stomachs, they were ready for battle. When they were full, they naturally had strength. The arrival of the reinforcements had obviously restored the morale of the temple guards. The foundation of a church was definitely not simple. Many of the surviving priests were close to high grade. After the first round of siege, most of the surviving temple guards were grade 3 professions. Among them, there were many special advanced guardian knights. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been able to hold on for so long against the beastmen army that was 10 times their size. Praise the Lord! Praise the Lord! Praise the Lord! A burst of praise and prayer sounded. When the fire of hope was reignited, many people could not help but kneel on the ground devoutly to pray and praise. The masked woman smiled and looked at everything in front of her. She seemed to be the center of everything. When anyone's eyes fell on her, their hearts could not help but feel a soft breeze. Everyone boarded the warship, and the elite pirates appeared in front of them. The priests and temple guards boarded the deck, and the civilians were placed in the cabin. The whole process was quite orderly, and there was not the slightest panic from beginning to end. Soren's figure appeared in the night. He looked at the masked woman in front of him and smiled. Then he said seriously, "Get ready to fight. Load the ammunition. The orc army is catching up." Eugene rushed over quickly. The orc warriors had a clear advantage in physical strength compared to humans. When all the civilians were placed in the cabin, the mighty orc army also appeared in the sight of the lookout. Damn. Sea Dog stood on the lookout with a monocular and murmured, "So many enemies. If they dare to rush up, how many will we kill with one shot?" They were pirates. Although the coastal areas were also restricted by the church, the control of alchemy weapons was not so strict. Almost every warship had cannons. Although they used solid shells, their lethality was still very high against ordinary soldiers. The disaster brought by the Arcane Empire made many church forces strictly control alchemy, But there were not so many restrictions in the areas where pirates were active. Soren's artillery power should be counted on one's fingers in the entire material plane. If it was a naval battle, perhaps the lethality would not be much. But if it was a densely packed battle on land, one shot could really clear a path of blood. Come. Scarface came out with a grin. His left arm was injured by an orc blade master. Fortunately, the orc blade master had just advanced, and he carefully prepared a poison crossbow, the poison used by the natives. Otherwise, he would have been killed by the enemy. There was actually a half-beast man sword saint hidden in the formation. Scarface, who had almost been killed by the half-beast man sword saint, grinned as he took out 2 iron balls that were chained together. He then personally put them into the barrel of the cannon and said with a strange smile, "Put this in. It will be fun to shoot with this shell." The enemies were getting closer and closer. Because they were busy sending the civilians to the ships, the pirates certainly did not have the time to retreat. So after Soren's order was given, the giant immediately led the elite pirates to form a formation on the river, and then waited for the enemy to rush over. It was fine if they did not dare to come. If they dared to come, these hundreds of cannons would definitely teach them a lesson. Eugene stopped in his tracks. He looked at the warships in front of him and his face became quite ugly. Pirates? He had traveled around the continent before, so it was impossible for him not to have an impression of pirate warships. Although there were no pirate flags on the warships, he could recognize that the enemies were all pirates at a glance. Cannons after cannons. Although Eugene himself scoffed at this inferior alchemy weapon and did not put it in his eyes at all, he was also very clear about the damage this weapon could do to ordinary soldiers. Its clumsy body and slow firing speed were simply a piece of scrap iron in many battles, but in this situation where the army was fighting, their lethality was quite amazing. Autumnfall also had cannons. But the half-elves were proud of their excellent archers. The dozens of cannons on the city gate were simply decorations. They were not at the same level as the black muzzles in front of them. Cannons were standard equipment for pirates. Whether it was the skills of the gunners, the number of cannons, or the power of the artillery, the coastal areas were not comparable to the inland areas. If they forced an attack, they would probably have to withstand a round of cannon fire. Note, the Droll Church hates alchemy. They believe that it is they who destroy the harmony of nature. The wounds left by nature cannot be healed for thousands of years. It is a disaster brought by the alchemy research of the Arcane Empire. Therefore, any place where the Droll Church is active, the degree of alchemy control is very strict. Chapter 478. It's just some scrap metal? The giant Knoll leader frowned and glanced at Eugene next to him and said in a deep voice, "I feel that the artifact my lord needs is nearby. We can't let them take it away." Eugene. Hurry up and order the attack. Eugene's mouth twitched slightly, and his face was not very good. The gnolls from the abyss had more than 20 points in agility. Unless they were lucky, it was impossible to hit them. From loading to firing, this level of craftsmanship posed little threat to the gnolls from the abyss. Otherwise, the main fighting force of the abyss would not rely on high-grade demons. However, these cannons weren't the same for the other orc warriors. If they rushed in like this, they would be hit by at least one round of cannons. Their dense formation suffered a lot of damage from the cannons. But the current situation was that they had to go. If they couldn't find the parts of the artifact, Flail of Time, the Gnoll army might turn against them. If the alliance was broken, the gnolls from the abyss would regard the orcs as enemies, and then crazy revenge attacks were likely to happen. In that case, it would be difficult to completely defeat the half-elves. The demons of the abyss were chaotic and evil. Since ancient times, chaos had either produced lunatics or idiots. Eugene was not sure what terrible things these lunatics would do if he did not meet their requirements. There. The giant gnoll leader with black hair suddenly pointed to the front. Its green eyes seemed to see through the darkness, and its sight was directly locked on a little girl wearing a small white priest robe under the night sky. It growled, "There. The artifact part my lord needs is in the hands of that hateful little girl. Milan. Saint Priest, Milan." The little girl did not realize the approaching danger at the moment. She was just glad that they were finally rescued. My lord's reinforcements had successfully rescued them. After boarding the warship, the women and children were much safer. Eugene recognized the little girl in the white priest robe at first glance. After all, the siege of the city that day was so memorable. In the end, it was this little girl who made all his plans fail. The orc army suffered heavy losses under the dragon breath of the 3 dragons. A strong killing intent appeared on Eugene's old face. New hatred and old hatred gathered together. He couldn't help but clench the bone spear on his back. It was true that it was a great chief worthy of respect, love and compassion, but it only cared about its own people. King of the Gnolls, Yeenagu. This evil, bloody, chaotic, murderous and crazy demon lord. No matter how evil, bloodthirsty and crazy he was in the eyes of others, his reputation among the Gnolls was as high as the sun in the sky. It could be said that most of the Gnolls in the multiverse respected him, and quite a number of them worshipped him crazily. The reason was simple. Over the past thousands of years, Yeenagu, the king of Gnolls, had done everything, whether it was launching a battle against the Lord of the Abyss, or trying his best to conquer the king of ghouls, or carrying out other evil schemes. There was only one ultimate goal. Yeenagu, the king of Gnolls, had always wanted to see the Gnolls grow stronger. He had been working hard all his life for this goal. From the perspective of the Gnolls, Yeenagu should be a great leader. Eugene was similar. That was why it had such a high reputation among the half-blood beastmen, but the other races only had hatred and enmity towards it. The two were actually the same kind of people, otherwise they would not have come together. Charge! With an angry roar, the orc army in front of them rushed over like a tide. The elite pirates on the riverbank had already been on standby. Behind them was the Agate River. The pirates who were familiar with water could easily jump into the river and then find a way to board the ship. The warships parked on the Agate River were fortresses. The orc army's fighting ability on land was indeed strong, but if they dared to come to the water, the pirates had enough confidence to teach them a lesson. The ground seemed to tremble. In the face of such a battle scene today, the elite pirates did not show the slightest panic on their faces. Battles had already trained them. In the fiercely competitive killing industry of pirates, unqualified candidates would only be eliminated. The orc army surged like a tide. Their physical fitness was really good. They could launch an impulsive battle directly after a rapid march. But that was all. When the enemy entered the range of the cannons, a storm of firepower poured out. Fire! 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 Bursts of muffled gunfire sounded, and the orc warriors at the front fell like wheat being harvested. Solid ammunition might not have enough killing area, but it was still too terrifying to deal with flesh and blood. Especially the chain cannons fired by some cannons, which swept across in an instant, leaving broken limbs all over the ground. The pirates' cannon fire was like a bloody and cruel symphony. Round after round of frenzied firing followed by the rhythm of the rising and falling of the cannon fire. Three-stage shooting. Eugene had never seen it before, but it was very common for Soren. The warships on the Agate River had already formed a crisscrossing firepower net. If it was just a normal battle command, Soren would not be able to do it to this extent, because it was too difficult to command in a real battle. But today was a little different. Soren had a powerful psionic warlock standing beside him. Long before the orc army arrived, she had already set up a psionic force field, so she could transmit Soren's orders to every warship's commander at any time. Her voice sounded in the mind of the warship's commander at the same time as Soren's orders. Compared to this kind of battle command that transcended time, Soren's previous method of relying on the pirate flag to transmit orders was simply too weak. It was not at the same level at all. No, there was no way to compare at all. If the current situation could be described with a metaphor, it would be the combat ability of the Renaissance era, but equipped with the combat command system of the Interstellar era. This feeling was too good, wasn't it? Soren never thought that it would be so easy to command the pirates in battle. In the past, he relied on the pirate flag to slowly give orders, and then waited for the opposing commander to see the flag before taking action. This was simply a ruthless destruction of his intelligence. But now, relying on the psionic warlock's psionic communication, the efficiency of battle command was completely different. The orc army was in a daze. Because at this moment, in their minds, the enemy's cannons did not stop from the beginning to the end. The warriors of the Blade clan who rushed in front fell in batches like wheat being cut down. They did not even rush in front of the enemy, and they suffered heavy losses under the baptism of cannon fire. Fear spread. The ground was full of broken limbs and wailing orc warriors. For them who worship brute force, Soren taught them a good lesson today, telling them that muscles could not solve all problems. Boom, boom, boom. The sound of cannon fire drowned the orc army. Night made it difficult for them to see how many cannons the enemy had. They could only hear the roar of the cannons from beginning to end. The dull noise covered the roar of the orc officers. After the first round of charge was directly killed by the cannons, the orc warriors who rushed at the front collapsed without any accident. They were just a group of mortals with flesh and blood. Soren looked at the battlefield in front of him and shook his head gently. Dealing with these ignorant orcs, he had an obvious feeling of IQ suppression. If these guys were not born with amazing brute force, maybe the plan would have gone better. But the current situation was enough. Soren saved the first batch of the most devout believers. After sending them to a safe place, he planned to transport a few more batches of believers. Population. What Mordor lacked the most was population. 20 or 30,000 half-elves could be transported back. Soren began to stockpile food and supplies so early in order to deal with today's situation. He was not afraid of a large population. Mordor was under rapid construction planning. Soren would only worry about the lack of labor, not too much labor. Swoosh, swoosh. Some fast-moving figures suddenly appeared in the night. The orc army that attracted the firepower at the beginning was just cannon fodder. These abyss gnolls that came in the night were the main force. An old figure flew over at an astonishing speed. Hundreds of lurking abyss gnolls rushed out from all directions, but their target was not Soren, nor the elite pirates on the river bank, but Milan, who was standing in the middle of the priests. Eugene rushed directly to the little girl in front of him. With a roar, he clenched his white-boned spear and threw it out. He actually wanted to nail her to the ground on the spot. It all happened too fast. The sudden attack of the abyss gnolls attracted everyone's attention, and then the next moment, the legendary war shaman with a profession level of 27 rushed over. He wanted to kill the saint priest in front of him, Milan. A poor little girl who lost her father in the war, lost all her relatives and lived alone in the world, less than 15 years old. Just because she had something in her hand that he had to get. The shadow of death loomed over her. Facing Ascendant Eugene's all-out attack, Milan's chances of surviving were close to zero. On the whole battlefield, almost no one could take the thunderous blow of this legendary war shaman, and at this moment, under the shadow of death, only one person could save her. Soren. His figure disappeared at the moment when the white-boned spear broke through the air. Chapter 479. Shadow Leap. Soren's figure instantly disappeared from where he stood. He crossed a distance of nearly 100 meters and directly appeared behind the divine priest Milan. He then pushed the little girl in front of him away and disappeared again at the same time. Fortunately, the distance of Shadow Leap was increased to 200 meters. Otherwise, Soren would not be able to save the little girl in front of him in time. Boom! The ground trembled. The spear thrown by the war shaman was like an anti-aircraft gun. It actually shattered the ground by more than 10 meters in an instant. If it really hit, Soren would probably be pierced through. Soren was not very clear about the advanced profession of war shaman, but with his rich combat experience and knowledge, he could roughly judge that war shaman was a special profession similar to Storm Lord. The Storm Lord was a special legendary profession that was advanced by the priests of the god of storms, while the war shaman was an advanced legendary profession that was advanced by the shaman priests of the totem faith. These special advanced professions might not have very strong spellcasting abilities, but their melee combat abilities were quite terrifying. After all, not many cleric classes were fragile. Very strong burst power. Soren turned his head to look at the little girl. After making sure that she was not injured, he turned his attention back to the war shaman Eugene in the distance. The spear thrown by the war shaman just now made Soren's heart skip a beat. He thought to himself, looks like he also specializes in spears and javelins. His attack just now was very similar to the Storm Lord. I'm afraid that the war shaman is also a violent advanced profession like the Storm Lord. Soren had seen the Storm Lord in battle before. The bone spear used by Eugene was very similar to the Storm Lord's attack. The Storm Lord was a violent legendary advanced profession, so Soren could roughly judge Eugene's fighting style in an instant. They had a very strong hand-to-hand combat ability, and at the same time, retained the ability to cast divine spells. Although this kind of spellcasting ability was not as good as a pure shaman's in a real battle, the effect of their combat strength was one-sided. His attack had missed. Eugene gasped for breath, but his expression didn't change at all. He lowered his head and knelt on the ground with one knee. He pressed his rough palm on the ground and said in a deep voice, "Ancestor's soul. Even the earth is trembling. Eternal heroic spirit. My race is undying." The deep and ancient language of the orcs echoed in the air. As Eugene slammed the ground, something strange happened behind Soren. Buzz. After Eugene's attack, the white-boned spear that was buried in the ground suddenly trembled. Then it was pulled out from the ground in an instant. A half-transparent, half-solid figure appeared beside the white-boned spear. It roared and held the white-boned spear with both hands, thrusting it toward Soren's back. A whistling gust of wind attacked. The white bone spear was like a bolt of white lightning that pierced through the air. Even with Soren's speed, it was difficult for him to dodge it. Shadow leap. Soren's figure instantly moved 10 meters horizontally. The half-illusory, half-real spirit did not hit Soren. With a roar, he waved his white-boned spear. In an instant, a terrible force broke out and directly swept the figures of 7 or 8 priests nearby, causing them to vomit blood and fly backward. Everyone back off. Soren's expression was quite serious. He roared, "Stop those gnolls. Don't come near here." An angel from another world? A saint apostle? Or should it be called a heroic spirit? Divine ascender, Eugene had indeed touched the realm of the gods. The half-spirit creature standing in front of Soren obviously came from another world. Even if it wasn't a saint apostle, it was a half-orc heroic spirit that had died in battle. In a situation where no one in the half-orc race had ascended to godhood, Eugene could still summon the heroic spirit of their ancestors. This meant that it had touched the realm of the gods and had a very high compatibility with the half-orc's ancestral spirit in the Grey Waste. Roar! With an angry roar, the heroic spirit instantly rushed toward Soren again. This kind of heroic spirit was born with legendary strength. Many of them were famous in the mortal world when they were alive. The heroic spirit that Eugene summoned was at least level 24. The situation was not good. When the heroic spirit was summoned, Eugene immediately continued to rush forward. Its target was still the Saint Priest Milan in front of it. Soren didn't know why Eugene hated the little girl in front of him so much that it wanted to kill her. She couldn't die. Saint Priest Milan couldn't die. Soren's pupils turned blood red in an instant. For Eugene's blatant attempt to kill his first Saint Cardinal, Soren's heart was filled with anger and killing intent. He activated the slaughter form in an instant, and his figure directly rushed out toward Eugene. Elemental Legion. When Soren's figure flew out and was ready to stop Eugene, a portal connected to the elemental plane was opened. A scorching aura spread. The appearance of the Elder Fire Elemental's huge body made the surrounding temperature rise sharply in an instant. The ground was scorched black, and everything within a radius of 100 or 200 meters was illuminated. The whistling of the wind sounded. The giant wind elemental followed the figure of the Elder Fire Elemental. The next moment, it flew into the air and directly rolled up an abyss knoll that was rushing toward Milan and threw it into the sky. Finally, there were heavy footsteps. The giant earth elemental slowly walked out, raised its millstone-sized fist, and smashed it toward the heroic spirit in front of it. The portal gradually closed. A legendary Elder Fire Elemental and 2 giant elementals with a monster level of around 18. Soren's figure was shrouded in an evil aura. This was the first time he had transformed into his slaughter form after killing the mutated demon. When he activated this ability, some unknown changes also occurred. Demonization. There was a very obvious demonic aura on Soren's body. It was the divine power belonging to a high-grade demon. A row of data appeared in front of him. Transform into slaughter form. Unknown changes have occurred in slaughter form. Ability to transform into slaughter form has been improved. Divine power fused with the slaughterer transformation effect. Under the transformation of the slaughterer, your attributes have been comprehensively improved. Strength +7, agility +3, physique +3, wisdom +3, combat ability is equivalent to a warrior of the same level, resistance to any abnormal status increases by 15 points. Under the slaughter form you have an additional ability, slaughter will, and an additional ability, slaughter instinct. Divine power combined. In the state of slaughterer. Automatically activated the effect of aura of fear. Any enemy within 100 meters of you must be forced to undergo a test of fear. The difficulty of the test is determined by your own divine value. If the test fails, the enemy will suffer the same effect as fear. Desire to slaughter has undergone an unknown change. Ordinary things will not be able to satisfy the desire to slaughter. The number of enemies that satisfy the desire to slaughter has been recalculated. Currently, kill at least 1 legendary enemy, otherwise you will fall into a state of madness. An evil aura of fear spread out. All the gnolls within 100 meters of Soren trembled, and some even howled in fear, turned around and fled into the night. Divinity of fear. After killing the mutated demon, Soren's slaughter form seemed to have undergone an unknown change. The power of divinity of fear was also integrated into it, and he directly mastered the aura of fear that only high-grade demons could have. No. Aura of fear. should be said to be a special power that only some existences close to the level of the Abyss Lord could master. All attributes were enhanced. All attributes increased by +1 under the slaughter form, and at the same time he also mastered the ability, Slaughter Instinct, that only mutated demons could have. This was a special ability. Its effect was similar to Battle Instinct, but it was more powerful. Roar. Eugene wanted to kill the Saint Cardinal Milan in front of him, which was a slap in the face in front of Soren. Even with Soren's temper, he was enraged by the enemy at this moment. He let out an angry roar, and his figure directly broke through the air, turning into a black shadow and pouncing on the enemy in front of him. The curved sword icing death was like a meteor across the sky, and a strange cold light automatically appeared. For a moment, it seemed that even the space was about to be broken, and it slashed towards Eugene's head on the spot. Clang. A dull thud echoed in the air. Another spear appeared in Eugene's palm. It was a grayish-black spear that seemed to be made of bone, but when it fought, it was like metal. A huge burst of power. At the position where the two of them fought, an invisible wave of air spread out. Heroic spirit immortal. My body is immortal. Eugene's old face was solemn. He clenched the spear and inserted it into the ground. In an instant, two half-illusory spirits appeared around his body. Heroic spirit war soul. He could even summon heroic spirits. The kingdom of heroic spirits where the orcs worshipped their ancestors was like a small divine kingdom built in the grey wilderness, and Eugene the Ascender was the only being in the entire orc tribe who could freely connect to this kingdom. He was not a god. But to some extent he was also a god. Because he was dying. The powerful power of the war shaman could not greatly extend his life. Now the old Eugene had already come to the edge of death. He only had a few years left in his life, and he had already felt the call of the ancestors' souls. A heroic spirit kingdom built in the grey wilderness. This place was calling his soul because he was qualified to enter it and become the most powerful existence. The call was equal. When death approached, he felt the call of the ancestors' souls. Eugene himself was like a god connected to the heroic spirit kingdom that the half-orc clan had worshipped for thousands of years. Because his life was coming to an end. Chapter 480. He would kill anyone who stood in his way. He would kill anyone who stood in his way. Soren, who had transformed into a slaughterer, seemed to have entered a berserk state. If he let Eugene behead his first and only Saint Cardinal in front of him, and in front of so many priests and believers, then he would not have the face to hold the throne and become a god. It would be a disgrace of his life. A stain that could never be washed away. The whole plan of becoming a god might become a joke. No, absolutely not. Soren's figure turned into an afterimage. When his feet touched the ground, cracks appeared all over the ground. Without any reservation, Soren completely let go of his restrictions and directly burst out with all his strength. The curved sword in his hand seemed to have broken through space. After killing many powerful enemies, the legendary curved sword Icing Death seemed to have recovered a lot of its spirituality. It even automatically emitted a strange cold light. The moment Soren slashed the war souls, a cold frost appeared. Dang. Dang. Soren held two swords in his hands and fought against Ascendant Eugene and two legendary war souls. Under the slaughterer state, he was still not at a disadvantage. Because his speed was too fast. Under the slaughterer state, Soren's dexterity directly exceeded 30 points. With his legendary evasion, legendary battle skills, epic dexterity, reflex evasion, intuition evasion, rolling evasion, flexible movement and other abilities, Soren was like a ghost. Even legendary enemies would find it difficult to touch him. After a long time of training and accumulation, Soren wanted to be able to deal with such a situation one day. When facing multiple legendary enemies at the same time, he still had the power to fight. One evasion ability might be insignificant. Two evasion abilities might not be that great. Three evasion specialties might be just SOSO. But when 4, 5, 6, including the legendary level of evasion abilities were stacked together, the quantitative change would lead to a qualitative change. Even when facing the siege of several legendary enemies, he would not be at a disadvantage. At this moment, Soren felt as if he had returned to his peak. Even though there were still some flaws in some of his abilities, he had recovered at least 80% of his strength. The only difference was the legendary abilities such as Shadow Domain and Shadow Step. Spinning Slash. The cold scimitar drew a cold light. Eugene nimbly dodged Soren's attack, but the two legendary hero spirits beside him could not. Their bodies were slashed by Soren's sword. Every time they came into contact with the sword, cold frost would appear. The energy supply of the scimitar icing death was quite effective against these half-spirits. Arcane Missile X6. Soren's target wasn't Eugene, the Ascendant. Instead, it was a heroic soul beside him. It was unrealistic for Soren to directly kill Eugene with a burst of power. This was because a level 27 war shaman had the vitality of a legendary warrior. However, Soren was 90% sure that he could kill one of the hero souls he summoned. Shadow Leap. Sword Form, Beheading. Shadow Strike. Soren's figure disappeared in an instant. The next moment he appeared behind the hero souls and attacked like a storm. The giant earth elemental stood in front of Milan to protect her. The legendary level fire elemental elder stopped the first heroic spirit with a white bone spear. The giant wind elemental approached at an amazing speed. With a gust of wind, it directly summoned a bolt of lightning. In an instant, it interfered with Eugene, who was beside Soren. More and more gnolls from the abyss appeared in the darkness, but the elite pirates had already reacted. Scarface rushed towards one of the gnolls. The giant roared and rushed towards one of the gnolls with a three-headed flail. This gnoll was most likely a legendary level enemy. Among all the pirate leaders, only he who had the blood of the swamp giant could fight head-on. The psionic warlock remained in place. However, there was a faint light in her eyes, as if she had locked onto some figures and was waiting for the right opportunity to appear. Sword Form, Waist Slash. Crack. With a cold light, Soren directly waved his sword and cut the hero soul into two from the middle. The giant wind elemental, which was very troublesome, temporarily attracted Eugene's attention. Eugene wanted to kill this fly that could fly around and was very fast. The speed of the wind was naturally quite fast. The wind elemental had a natural elemental bonus. It was the only creature that could fly freely and was very fast. Soren wanted to kill a hero soul first. Eugene naturally wanted to kill a high-grade elemental and weaken the enemy's combat power. A row of cold data appeared in front of him, killed the hero soul. Extracting the target's soul energy. You've gained 27,000 slaughter EXP. The target is a divine creature. Extracting the target's divine power. Extraction failed. The target's body is not in the current plane. Divinity activated. Forcibly extracting the target's soul energy. Extraction successful. You've gained 3 divinity. The body of the hero soul gradually dissipated, like the light of a firefly, and finally disappeared with the wind. At the same time, in a plain called the Grey Wilderness, there was a temple built on an empty and desolate plain. Suddenly there was a violent fluctuation of energy. In this world that was close to the scorching hell, there was suddenly a very slight fluctuation of energy. The power of the law that belonged to the gods directly broke through the space and instantly fell into a temple that had been worshipped for a long time. Crack. There was a shattering sound in the ancient temple. This power was like a lightning strike on the altar in the center of the temple, and in an instant one of the hero soul statues was completely shattered. The ancestral worship of the half-orcs for thousands of years. Although there were many heroic souls that could return to their ancestral land, those who were qualified to become heroic souls and set up statues on the altar of the shrine were all powerhouses who had already stepped into the legendary realm when they were alive. But now, one of the hero soul statues was collapsing. The divine power on it was dissipating, and the fluctuation of the soul was gradually disappearing. Finally, the whole statue collapsed and countless pieces of stone scattered on the ground. Nothing was left on it. Fell. One of the hero souls had fallen. They should be similar to the existence of the gods from another world. Even if they died in the mortal world, they wouldn't really die. The only way to really kill them was to come to the Grey Wilderness, and kill them once or let a god do it personally with his divine power. In a place far away from the temple. In the desolate plain, there was a huge ancient altar. In the center of the altar, there was a figure holding a skull. He silently looked into the distance and felt the power that had just broken through the space. He murmured, "A war between gods? Have the gods in the mortal world already fought? Only a battle between gods could affect other planes, and only the power of gods could cross the plane and destroy the hero souls in the Grey Wilderness." Boom. Soren's figure flew out and Eugene also stepped back. There was a trace of blood on the corner of his mouth. There was a slight cough. Soren's figure slowly stood up. He looked at the half-orc war shaman in front of him and once again rushed forward with his sword. However, his target wasn't Eugene, but the first hero soul behind him who was holding a white-boned spear. The psionic warlock was ready. As a psionic warlock who once had 30 levels, even if Butterfly was cursed by the Queen of Spiders, she could still exert a powerful combat power. Boom. Seeing Soren turn around and rush toward the hero soul, Eugene rushed forward without hesitation and instantly blocked his figure with his spear. An invisible wave of air spread out. The two sides were in a stalemate again. Soren couldn't kill Eugene, and Eugene wasn't sure that he could kill Soren. So strong. Eugene the Ascendant. Soren could only fight to a draw with Eugene in his slaughter state. This guy was indeed far stronger than other legends. Eugene's face was solemn. Or rather, his face was quite ugly at the moment. Ever since his life was coming to an end, he gradually gained the power to connect with the souls of his ancestors. However, when Soren killed a hero soul, he suddenly lost part of his connection with the souls of his ancestors. He completely lost contact with one of the hero souls, and no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't sense his existence. It was as if he had completely disappeared. Hero soul. Under the half-orcs' ancestral worship, those who could transform into hero souls were all legendary figures when they were alive. There were only so many hero souls formed by the half-orcs' ancestral worship. They were another kind of gods, a weakened version of gods. If any of the half-orcs could become a god, these hero souls could be transformed into powerful god servants at any time. But now, it seemed to have disappeared. It had completely disappeared. This was a battle between gods. Perhaps Soren himself didn't realize this, but when the Ascendant Eugene summoned the hero souls formed by the half-orcs' ancestral worship to the material plane, and Soren personally joined the battle as the god of the half-elves. The battle between gods had already broken out. The battle between gods wouldn't change because of the weak strength of both sides. The battle between weak gods could also reach the standard of a battle between gods. And when the battle between gods broke out, whether it was petitioners, hero souls, saint apostles, or god servants, once they died in battle they would truly fall. Chapter 481. The opportunity was right in front of him. After a short fight, Soren had a clear understanding of Eugene's strength. Shamans had various abilities similar to priests, but they specialized in elemental or soul-related divine spells. The war shaman that Eugene had evolved into obviously had the ability to summon souls. Judging from the 3 legendary hero souls that Eugene had summoned, it could be confirmed that the word war was referring to the half-orc hero souls that had died in battle. In terms of hand-to-hand combat, Eugene's strength was not much different from a legendary warrior, but his natural attributes seemed to be very high, and his long life had allowed him to master many powerful abilities. Because of his half-orc bloodline, his initial strength was definitely above 18, and he should have mastered more legendary abilities than Soren. Only a humanoid boss like Soren could fight him head-on. If it were other legendary professions, they would have been killed by the 3 legendary heroic spirits in an instant, and Eugene would not even have to do it himself. This guy was also a big boss. Just by looking at his titles, Ascendant, Dragon Slayer, King of Frost Giants Terminator, and so on, one could feel the terrible power of Eugene himself. The opportunity was fleeting. In the face of Eugene's powerful combat power, Soren did not hesitate to continue to weaken his strength and kill all the summoned heroic spirits. Gloria was not here, Vivian was not here, and neither was the fallen witch. After all, the legendary realm was a natural barrier that was difficult for mortals to cross. Although Soren had brought the psionic warlock, she was still cursed by the Queen of Spiders. The only subordinate that was closest to the legendary realm was the giant, who was not very smart. Soren had to kill these heroic spirits first so that he could focus on fighting Eugene. Besides, killing these heroic spirits gave more divinity than killing the Son of Fear. The half-orc still had a lot of resources. Greater haste. Soren did not hesitate to use his last card. The +5 spell of the Lich Ring was instantly activated. Soren's speed suddenly increased to the point that the naked eye could not catch him. He turned into a shadow and continued to pounce on the heroic spirits behind him. Whirlwind? Eugene's old body trembled in an instant, and his face showed a hint of surprise. This time he could no longer catch up with Soren's speed. He could only watch as Soren appeared beside the heroic spirits in an instant. The legendary curved sword turned into countless of blades that could not be caught by the naked eye. It was like a strange and cold light falling from the sky. Eugene waved his spear and stabbed at the giant wind elemental. He was shocked. How is this possible? How can a rogue master to whirlwind? This did not seem to be the first person to think that Soren could use whirlwind. The effect of greater haste was indeed very powerful, but it was still far from reaching the level of a whirlwind. The reason why Soren looked like whirlwind was more because his attack speed was quite fast. Psionic blast. Butterfly finally got the chance to attack. She raised her middle finger in an instant, and the next moment, there was a burst of strong psionic energy. Psionic warlock? No. It's an advanced psionic warlock. Eugene's face was quite ugly. It was not until now that he found out that there was a powerful legendary figure among the enemies, and it was a very dangerous psionic warlock. Their strange abilities were only known to people in the astral plane. It was rare to encounter such an existence in the material plane. The figure of the heroic spirit stiffened for a moment. But this blink of an eye was enough for Soren. He activated the slaughter transformation in greater haste. Soren was now not so much a rogue but a berserker with full power. Sword form, spinning strike. Shadow leap. Sword form, beheading. Shadow strike. The storm-like attack burst out in an instant with the help of greater haste. The overwhelming sword light shrouded the heroic spirit holding the white-boned spear. Then its body exploded like fireworks, and the whole person dissipated in the air with the wind. A row of data appeared in front of him, killed the heroic spirit. Extracting the target's soul energy. You've gained 36,000 slaughter EXP. The target is a divine creature. Extracting the target's divine power. Extraction failed. The target's body is not in the current plane. The power of divinity has been activated. Forcibly extracting the target's soul energy. Extraction successful. You've gained 4 divinity points. The Grey Wilderness. The second strange energy burst out like thunder and fell in the center of the altar of the temple. After the first statue of the heroic spirit shattered, then in the center of the altar of the temple, the 5 heroic spirit statues erected in the core area, the one on the far right also collapsed. The divine power on it gradually dissipated, and the fluctuations of the soul disappeared little by little. This heroic spirit statue seemed to have a different identity, and it also had a special power in this temple. When it also turned into broken stones all over the ground, there were traces of cracks on the whole altar. On the other side of the wilderness, the existence holding the skull silently watched all this and murmured, "It looks like the War of the Gods." The War of the Gods started so soon. It looks like the real era of chaos is coming. I should also make more preparations. 2 heroic spirits, 7 divinity points. At this moment, even Soren was a little excited. Such a harvest was simply unimaginable. I'm afraid. Even if he slaughtered an indigenous tribe of tens of thousands of people, he would not be able to get so many divinity points. But now he just needed to kill these heroic spirits before Eugene. At this moment, Soren even hoped that Eugene could summon a few more heroic spirits. Anyway, he could still hold on for a while, and the greater haste spell was enough for him to kill a few more. The strength of the heroic spirits would be weakened when they were summoned to the material plane, and they could only retain about 80% of their combat power. If he really went to the Grey Wilderness to kill them, these heroic spirits would be at least 24 profession level or above. It was just like how the divine servants from another world were only at the legendary level, but in the divine kingdom, many of them were at the advanced legendary level or above. Cover me. Soren did not hesitate to rush to the last heroic spirit, and at the same time, ordered the psionic warlock to cover his surprise attack. At this moment, Eugene finally panicked a little. Even when facing the giant dragon, the frost giant king and countless enemies, Eugene did not panic like this. But now, when facing Soren who was rushing to the heroic spirits at an amazing speed, Eugene's heart was in a mess. Because just at that moment, after Soren killed the heroic spirit he summoned, Eugene lost part of his connection with the ancestral spirit. No matter how he tried, he could not sense the heroic spirit he summoned. It was as if it had completely disappeared. Something was wrong. At this moment, even an idiot could feel that something was wrong. In the past, the heroic spirits had been killed, but they were only weakened for a period of time. Eugene could still sense their existence, and it would never be like now, where there was no news of them at all. It was as if they had completely fallen. Unfortunately, Soren would not give him a chance. He did not have the habit of giving his enemies a chance. With the psionic warlock's second burst of psionic energy, Soren's figure once again turned into a shadow and rushed forward. In an instant he waved countless swords, each aimed at the enemy's fatal point. Since Eugene wanted to kill his only saint necromancer, Soren naturally had to return the favor and kill all the heroic spirits he summoned. The half-spirit body exploded like fireworks. As the countless faint lights dissipated, a row of data appeared in front of Soren's eyes, You have killed a heroic spirit. Extracting target's soul energy. You have received 21,000 slaughter EXP. Target is a divine creature. Extracting target's divine power. Extraction failed. Target's body is not in the current plane. Divinity activated. Forcibly extracting target's soul energy. Extraction successful. You have received 2 divinity, 3 hero spirits and 9 divinity points. At this moment, Soren felt unprecedentedly carefree. Such a big harvest was completely beyond his expectations, although he still did not understand why. But Soren knew that at this moment, the heroic spirits that had been maintained by the orcs for a long time had probably suffered heavy losses. Most of the heroic spirits that could become heroic spirits were legendary figures when they were alive, and there were not many of them. In this battle, the orcs had lost at least hundreds of years of heritage. At this moment, Eugene finally felt afraid. What he was afraid of was not the battle nor death, but Soren's strange ability. Any heroic spirits that died under his blade would lose contact with him, as if they had completely fallen. Eugene's heart was shrouded in a haze. He was very afraid that his guess was true. If that was the case, then the price he paid in this battle was too heavy. Heroic spirits. The orcs could only produce 1 legendary figure in the last 100 years, and the ancestral sacrifice needed a long time to gather divinity and transform into heroic spirits. If 3 heroic spirits fell at once, he would be a sinner of the clan. Eugene did not dare to summon again. Whether the heroic spirits had really fallen or not, he did not dare to summon them in front of Soren again. But if he did not summon the heroic spirits, his strength would be reduced by half. It was impossible for him to defeat Soren, who had the whirlwind in front of him with his own strength. The balance of the battle seemed to have tilted. Chapter 482. A whoa. A large number of corpses of the gnolls from the abyss were left on the ground. They couldn't even reach their target after a long time. Finally, the morale of these ferocious gnolls collapsed. As the leader of the gnolls retreated, Eugene did not hesitate to stomp his feet to awaken the elements. He shook Soren away and retreated in an instant. The heroic spirit was killed, and he could not break through Soren's defense line. Eugene's goal became to contain Soren, hoping that the gnoll leader could attack him. But, as expected, it was disappointed. In front of him, there were many corpses of the gnolls from the abyss. These guys did not do anything at all. The enemy retreated. Behind Soren there was a tsunami of cheers. The priests led by Milan knelt down toward his back, praying and praising the battlefield in awe. The range of destruction caused by a legendary battle was quite amazing. The core of the battle between Soren and Eugene could even directly kill high-grade professions. Every time the two of them collided, they left potholes on the ground. Fortunately, this was a wild area, otherwise the city wall would have been destroyed by them. Soren did not chase after him. The reason was simple. Soren had not really hit Eugene once in the battle. He did not even force Eugene to use his elemental defense. However, Eugene did not really hit Soren either. The strength of the two sides was almost equal. If they fought hard, both sides would suffer. Soren did not want to see this kind of thing, and Eugene probably did not want to see it either. There were many things that Soren needed to do. The most important thing at the moment was to bring the half-elf believers he needed to the Pirate Islands, and Eugene's existence was very important to this. As long as Eugene was still alive, the crisis in Autumnfall would not be resolved. Only when the crisis was not resolved, Soren could get people to the distant sea. Otherwise, if the orc army retreated, even if Soren relied on the influence of the Temple of Light and conveyed the prophecy of a greater disaster in the future, many ordinary people might not be willing to leave their homes. Because to mortals they could only see what was before them. Soren was not a soft-hearted person. However, in order to achieve his goal, even if they were enemies, he would allow them to exist for a while longer. Get on board. Soren looked at the others and said in a low voice, "Prepare to retreat. The first fleet will stay nearby to provide support. The rest of you will send the civilians out." Orders were issued one after another. In the end, Soren came to the psionic butterfly's side and whispered, "Go with them personally and send the civilians to the port before coming back. Don't let the pirates harass them." The half-elf first mate was a steady and ruthless person. With him around, Soren was not worried that anyone would go against his orders. The psionic butterfly nodded and said, "Understood." These believers were the foundation, and there were many children among them. After everything that happened today, these children had a deep memory in their hearts. As long as they were trained a little, they would have a solid foundation in the future. Even if the conversion of adults was successful, most of them would be ordinary believers. However, many devout believers could be born among these children, and it was even possible to cultivate fanatics. This was very important for Soren's future plan. He must not let these children have a bad impression of the church in their childhood. Finally, Soren came to the front of the priest. The civilians could be sent away directly, but these priests had to stay, because Soren would not make such a big fuss just to take these people away. Tomorrow you will bring back a batch of food and weapons. Soren looked down at the priests kneeling at his feet and said in a low voice, I will send people to secretly support you. When the fleet comes back, we will send the second batch of civilians away. The priests present were thoughtful when they heard this. They nodded and said, My lord, rest assured. We understand what we should do. Soren smiled and said slowly, Very good. Milan, come with me. The petite priest in front of him immediately stood up and obediently followed Soren to the captain's room. My lord. The delicate little girl humbly lowered her head and said softly, My lord, I don't know what you want me to do. Soren turned around and looked at her. He said in a low voice, Why did that orc target you so much? Just now, it seemed like it wanted to kill you at all costs. Milan's face showed a trace of surprise, then she shook her head and said, I don't know. Oh right. Could it be because of this thing? The little girl seemed to be deep in thought. She quickly took out a dark green flail and handed it to Soren. She said in a low voice, This is a treasure of the church. It is said that it came from a very powerful artifact. Because my weapon of choice is the flail, Grandpa Bishop temporarily gave it to me. I have just learned some combat skills and I was going to give it to my lord when I see him. Flail? Solon frowned when he heard this. He reached out and took a look at it and then his whole body suddenly trembled. Time flail * poison. As expected. Eugene targeted Saint Cardinal Milan, not because of hatred but because of the components of this divine artifact. Item type, time flail, poison, incomplete, item grade. Grade 1 artifact, item description. This is a part of a legendary artifact. Because it lacks the power of the other 4 parts, it can't even exert the power of a legendary artifact. However, it has great potential. As one of the most powerful artifacts in the entire material plane, if someone can gather all 5 parts of the time flail, he or she will have the power to kill gods and demons. The son of Massacre once used this weapon to kill the last enemy in the War of Gods. This weapon has been stained with God's blood, and there is a residual killing aura on it. Requirements: Strength 14 or above, Strength requirement +2. Equipment effect: Artifact characteristic: God's blood, poison damage, armor break, cripple +3 sharpness, +5 toughness, +10 armor break, +5 bone break. Weapon effect: Artifact characteristic. This weapon is a legendary artifact. It cannot be destroyed by normal means and it is also immune to disintegration. Only legendary disintegration has a 1% chance of destroying this artifact, but the one who destroys it will also have to suffer the backlash of the divine power. Weapon effect: God's blood. This weapon has been soaked in the blood of countless high-level demons, demigods, false gods, and even real gods. Some powerful beings who once coveted the god of massacre have also died in its hands. Even if this is only a part of the artifact, the time flail is still soaked in the power of the god's blood. Weapon effect: Poison damage. This is the poison head among the 5 heads of the time flail. As only 1/5 of the parts have been repaired, this weapon can only exert a weak power. When it comes into contact with any enemy, it will cause an additional 5 points of poison damage to the target. Weapon special effect: Armor-shattering characteristic. As a divine artifact, the Age Flail has a terrifying armor-shattering ability. Even if only one of the flail heads is equipped, it can easily shatter most armor defenses. Age Flail could ignore all armors below the Transcendence level, including full-body armors that couldn't block its attack. When the 5 heads of the time flail are fully assembled, its armor-breaking ability will be further enhanced. Even legendary level armor will not be able to protect against its damage. Weapon effect: Cripple. The time flail has a terrible lethality. When attacking the enemy, there is a certain chance of crippling the target directly. When the target is attacked by the time flail, the target must undergo a compulsory test of fortitude. Otherwise, the movement speed and attack speed will be reduced because of the cripple. The number of heads of the time flail determines the power of the ability. The time flail. It was indeed one of the parts of the divine artifact. Soren held the part of the divine artifact in his hand and could not help but feel a familiar aura in his heart. It was the power of its god's blood. This weapon had really killed a powerful existence who once had the divine domain of slaughter. The god's blood had soaked this weapon. As one of the most infamous divine artifacts in the material plane, the number of enemies who died under the time flail was probably more than the divine avenger. This was because its complete form was a 5-headed flail. A flail handle was connected to 5 flail heads, which were respectively fire, acid, ice, poison, and lightning. In battle, as long as one was touched by any of the flail heads, all 5 elements would explode together. The feeling was simply indescribable. More importantly, as one of the most powerful heavy weapons, the time flail had a certain chance of crippling the enemy directly. Even if a high-level demon was touched by it, it could instantly break his leg. This was one of the weapons that could easily cripple the enemy in the material plane. It's too dangerous for you to carry this with you. Soren held the time flail, poison, in his hand and said slowly, "The King of Knolls is probably looking for it. Just leave it with me for now." Milan nodded obediently and said, "Okay." Soren looked at the little girl in front of him from head to toe. In terms of appearance, she was very delicate and had a slim figure. Although she was not fully developed yet, she would definitely be a great beauty in the future. This was the strange thing. He did not know what was wrong with the women in this world. They were all so powerful, and the weapons they used were even more unrestrained than the men. Not to mention the little girl in front of him. In his memory, the priestess in Amber City also used a flail as a weapon. Shouldn't a flail be used by a boss like the Ringwraith, which was a dangerous weapon with great lethality? Why did these little girls like this weapon? It was completely wrong. Chapter 483. Autumn Fall. When the first batch of believers was safely sent away, the priests of the half-elf church returned to Autumn Fall with a lot of food. There was a new atmosphere brewing in the city that had been trapped for a long time. The food brought back by the priests was very rich. In addition to high-quality wheat from the south, there was also a lot of bacon, and salted fish. Most of them were meat. The number of salted fish was very abundant. Many civilians were given some fish. This was the first time they had tasted meat in a long time. Soren estimated that the last thing they lacked was fish. The location of Moder was on the fish migration route. If anyone had seen the migration of fish, they would know what a spectacular scene it was. As for salt, it was not a problem. This simple thing could not stop Soren. If there was no salt in the sea, it would be a joke. Originally, Soren wanted to make food similar to fish floss, but because he was too busy and had no energy to craft, he could only put it aside for the time being. As time passed, the direction of Autumn Fall was also changing. More and more civilians wanted to leave this dangerous place. Because there was not much food in the city. If the orcs did not retreat, they would not be able to produce and work. It was difficult for an ordinary civilian to resist natural disasters. Once they were affected by the war, they would be completely destroyed. The number of believers was increasing. The priests actively mobilized civilians to leave here. More and more people were affected, and the situation in the city was becoming more and more strange. In the splendid hall, many people in noble clothes gathered here. There were already many people outside who could not fill their stomachs, but there was plenty of food and even good wine here. Nobles and civilians were always in two different worlds. The power they held was too convenient. Did they really defeat the orcs? There was a man with a cold face at the top of the hall. He looked at the others in front of him and slowly said, "I didn't expect them to be able to defeat Eugene. If this goes on, I'm afraid that group of untouchables will be easily bewitched." An old man looked at him and slowly said, "I don't know if we can ask them to help us deal with the orc army." One of the middle-aged men shook his head and said, "I'm afraid it's difficult. Since they intend to migrate their believers, it is obvious that they intend to give up here. Otherwise, they would not give up the church's property. I don't think it's possible to persuade them to fight against the orcs." Naturally, the church also had its own assets. The half-elf church decisively gave up on farmland, temple, real estate, and so on. They had no plans to stay here at all. "Should we stop them?" one of them asked in a deep voice. The old man turned around and glared at him. "Idiot! Are you trying to split the city and start a war?" Moreover, most of the people they took away were civilians. Many of them were old, weak, women, and children. They had no fighting power at all. The army is still in our hands. As long as the army doesn't leave, we won't lose any of our strength. Those civilians are just a burden to us, a waste of food for no reason. The army must remain stable. We can't let any of the warriors leave. If they want to take away the old, the weak, the women and the children, then let them. Everyone fell silent. They could not go to war with the church, nor could they stop them blatantly. After all, there was a God behind the other side. The situation in Luoya City absolutely did not allow them to anger the God and make things worse. In this case, they were bound to do anything. They could only secretly make some small moves. Although the priests of the church still couldn't use magic, they were also high-grade warriors without magic. They had a high influence in Luoya City. If they were directly targeted, the situation in Luoya City would collapse. At this moment, a middle-aged man who was obviously dressed as droll stood up and slowly said, "If it's just sending the civilians to a safe place, it may not be a bad thing. After all, it's difficult for us to defeat the orcs in a short time. It's going to be autumn soon. We've lost a lot of fields. These civilians will increase our burden if they stay here. If they leave, the food will be left for our warriors. His Excellency, Earthwalker, has given us a response. As long as we can hold on until June, His Excellency will come to support us." Earthwalker? Hearing the middle-aged droll's words, the nobles present could not help but stand up in surprise. Really? His Excellency is really willing to help us. This is great. There was a sound of surprise. The middle-aged droll glanced at the others present and nodded. Some time ago, His Excellency led the droll order to look for something important. Now he's coming back. This Excellency is a kind and generous elder. He will certainly not sit back and watch the orcs ravage our land. As long as His Excellency is willing to help, we will definitely defeat Eugene's orc army. Earthwalker. One of the most knowledgeable and powerful droll. It was impossible to determine how high his profession level was, but he had been in the legendary realm for hundreds of years. He was the leader of the Earth Doctrine in the Droll Order. He had been living in seclusion in the depths of the Elven Forest and rarely intervened in the affairs of ordinary people. However, the current situation in Luoya City seemed to make this Excellency intend to help. There were many droll among the half-elves. They also had their own voice in the Droll Order. The elves did not seem to intend to send troops to help, but if the Droll Order was willing to help them, it would be more useful than the elven reinforcements. Time passed by day. The first batch of believers was quickly sent away, and the pirate fleet returned to the vicinity of Luoya City again. Soren's plan was carried out in an orderly manner. He only cared about his believers and did not intend to intervene in other things. The first batch of believers sent away more than 5,000 people. The second batch of believers was much more. According to the recent statistics of the church, about 20,000 civilians were willing to follow them. These were the civilians who originally believed in the church. They easily accepted the will of God. Those who chose to stay were those who did not want to leave their homes. Most of them were rich people who owned land. Civilians had nothing in the war. However, these people were not willing to give up their land. Even if it was now occupied by the orcs, as long as they repelled the orcs, they would regain everything. The noble council asked Soren for a batch of food through the church. Soren thought about it and agreed to their request. Nearly a month had passed. The arrival of the time of troubles was getting closer and closer. He now had only 7 months left, and then the Avatar crisis would break out. Soren did not want to waste too much time here. The believers of the church were sent away in 3 batches. Soren's fleet was enough, and with Raging Sand Island as a transit station, there was no problem in transporting so many people back. A gentle sea breeze blew in his face. A warship docked at the dock of Raging Sand Island, and a crowd of people came out of the ship. Next to them was an army responsible for maintaining the situation. "Sister, slow down." Idu helped a young woman down from the deck. She was holding a half-grown baby in her arms. The little guy was very brave. He looked around with his big black eyes and was not afraid at all. Finally, they set foot on the ground again. Many people around revealed happy smiles. The priest's voice came into their ears, instructing them to stay here and rest for a while before continuing their journey. They did not know where they were going, but they did not panic about the future. It was as if there was an invisible force comforting their hearts and making them hopeful for the future. Some priests of the church also left with them. Although there was still no way to use divine spells, the healing ability of the priests could solve a lot of problems. Along the way they saw many ferocious pirates, but these pirates did not disturb them at all. Order was brilliant. The 2 sides were like 2 boundaries. They were just a group of travelers and would not stay here for too long. Along the way they saw many law enforcement teams maintaining order. They were a group of very fierce guys. Occasionally, some daring guys wanted to take liberties with them, but they were directly hung up and whipped more than 10 times. There was a prepared camp on Raging Sand Island. Many people were temporarily settled here. After resting for about 2 days, groups of people were sent away one after another. At this time, they saw not only pirates but also merchant ships that were responsible for sending them to their destination. It was really the fleet of the Chamber of Commerce. George tried to chat with the guards of the fleet and easily inquired about their origin. The Chamber of Commerce from Shipwreck Bay was responsible for sending them away. They usually ran the ocean trade of the outer islands. This time, they were recruited by Sir Soren to be responsible for transporting these refugees to the city of Mordor. As long as these chambers of commerce sent away a group of people, they could be exempted from a year's tribute. Now, many chambers of commerce from the south coast were mobilizing fleets, and some planned to exempt themselves from 3 years of tribute in one breath. Sir Soren always kept his word. Since this Sir made a promise, naturally he would not go back on his word. It was just a trip back and forth to send people over. It would only take a little time, but the benefits were tempting. Along the way, the guards of the Chamber of Commerce took care of them. Occasionally, when someone was sick, there would be doctors to treat them. These people who were sent away were counted. In case of an accident, the Chamber of Commerce would be responsible. George asked some information about the city of Mordor. When the guards of the Chamber of Commerce mentioned this place, their faces were full of envy. It was said that it was a very rich place. There was an endless stream of merchant ships coming and going. The security was also much better than other places. There was a lot of news about that place. For example, there was a magical fertilizer there. Even the priests of the Temple of Agriculture were attracted there. For example, even slaves could get freedom as long as they worked hard. It was said that some slaves had been given land because of their hard work and so on. Time passed like this. There were many curious people like George, and they were getting closer and closer to the city of Mordor. Chapter 484. Autumnfall Agate River. Soren stood on the deck and looked into the distance. He turned to look at Scarface behind him and slowly said, "What about the orcs?" Scarface bowed slightly and said, "Your Excellency, they have been very obedient recently." Soren nodded and said in a deep voice, "Let the scouts pay attention to the orcs' movements. If there are any special situations, immediately send them to me." "Yes, Your Excellency." Scarface retreated. The orc army had been defeated twice in a row, and Eugene's actions had become more cautious. For the first time in the city of Autumnfall, Sauron's avatar summoned an ancient brass dragon, forcing Eugene to retreat and regroup. That night, when they attacked Soren, Eugene returned without success and suffered heavy losses. 2 consecutive failures were very serious for the orcs, and their morale had dropped a lot. Recently, the orcs did not make any movements. Perhaps they were afraid of being hit again. If they were defeated 3 times in a row, perhaps the morale of the iron-blooded army would collapse. Eugene needed a victory to motivate the soldiers, but Soren would not give him such an opportunity. The land occupied by the orcs by the Agate River. Teams of orc laborers were working hard. Under the orders of the overseers, they chopped down the trees in the forest one by one and transported the logs back one by one. The orc army's camp was already busy. Many orcs were busy working, and the outline of a foundation had been built nearby. Relying on their natural strength, the orcs were very efficient. In just half a day, a rough outline of an orc fortress appeared. But this was only the beginning. From the foundation, the scale of this fortress was much larger. Autumnfall. The meeting hall was dignified. Many nobles were talking. One of them said, "What? The orcs built a fortress on the other side of the river? What are they going to do?" The people present were worried. If the orcs really built a large military fortress on the other side of the river, it would be difficult for them to recover their lost land in the future. Even if reinforcements arrived, the situation would turn into a situation where the enemy would defend and they would attack. However, if the gnomes attacked the fortress built by the orcs, they would have to pay a terrifying price. The shaman priests were also spellcasters. Although the craftsmanship of the orcs' fortresses wasn't good to look at, their durability was definitely not worse than other races. If this fortress was really built, it would be against Wuxia City. That may be a good thing. The old man sitting on the right glanced at the others. His territory was near Wuxia City. Even if the land on the other side of the river was recovered, he would not get much benefit, so he calmly said, "In this way, the orcs should not attack in a short time. We can hold on until the Earth Walkers' reinforcements arrive." The orcs finally learned their lesson. After being heavily injured by Soren twice in a row, Eugene's original plan to defeat the half-elf in one go was completely ruined. Now, building a military fortress on the other side of the river to confront Luoya City was undoubtedly the wisest action at present. On the one hand they could consolidate the rear, and on the other hand they could advance and retreat freely. Anyway, Soren did not think that the current Luoya City had the ability to attack the military fortress of the orcs. No one could afford the casualties. Eugene is going to push forward step by step. Soren looked at the river in the distance and whispered, if the military fortress is really built, and the location is chosen on the other side of the Agate River, it would be impossible for the half-elves to recover their lost land without fighting for decades. What a pity. Eugene didn't calculate that under the Avatar crisis, the fortress would be like paper for some existences. Outer Islands, Port Mordor. A towering lighthouse appeared in front of him. The excited voices of the sailors alarmed George. Relying on his own ability, he got along with the guards of the fleet in just a few days, so he soon knew that they were about to arrive at Mordor City. A gentle sea breeze blew in his face. Flocks of seabirds could be seen in the distance. Under the blue sky, flying fish figures appeared from time to time on the sea. Everything in front of him was so novel and shocking for George, who had lived in the inland area since he was a child. He felt a wider world and even had a longing for life on the sea. Compared to the past, he was confined to a town near Luoya City. Everything he saw along the way completely subverted his understanding. For the first time he knew that the world was so big, and there were so many things that he had never thought of before. The vision of the civilians in this world was actually very small. There were quite a few people like George. Soon, other people came to the deck and looked ahead with faces full of amazement. The figure of Mordor City appeared. It was a huge natural port, which had been expanded after construction. White sails could be seen in the distance. A large number of ships were docked near the port. Before they got close, they could hear the shouts of the dock workers. They were busy transporting goods, and from time to time, a ship set sail. Just at first sight, George felt the prosperity here. Everything in front of him was a scene he had never seen in Luoya City. Even the entire inland area did not have such a prosperous trade. Trade was wealth and trade was vitality. The prosperity of Whiterun was because of trade, and the decline of Whiterun was because trade was blocked. We'll be there soon. After this period of contact, the guard captain had become familiar with George. He glanced at the young man beside him and smiled, someone will arrange for you when you get to the dock. George smiled and nodded. He reached out and touched his pocket. There was still some money in it. The captain had taken good care of them along the way, so George planned to invite him to the tavern for a drink after arriving at Mordor City. He was not sure how the church would arrange for him and others, but if he could have a good relationship with this person, he might be able to become a caravan guard. He was still a little confident in his skills. However, the guard captain smiled and refused, slowly said, after sending you to the port, we will leave immediately. This time, many chambers of commerce have heard the news. I heard that there was a fleet from Arendelle. They had already planned to go back with the goods. As soon as they heard the conscription order from Sir Soren, they unloaded the goods in Shipwreck Bay and ran to Raging Sand Island with empty ships. If we send you, the profit of the Chamber of Commerce will increase by at least 20% or 30%, and the reward in our hands will also be a lot more. So, the fleet will not stay here and will return to Raging Sand Island today. A year of tax exemption. This was quite attractive to the Chamber of Commerce. Under the control of Soren, all the routes were controlled, and the Chamber of Commerce had to pay a lot of protection fees. If the tax was exempted for a year, the profit would increase by a lot. Otherwise, it would be impossible to attract so many people. If it were not for the Chamber of Commerce from Shipwreck Bay, the City of Wealth, and Port Tylon that could come here, perhaps the fleets from other places would also want to make a profit. Not only did they get a favor from this, sir, but they also got practical benefits. Why wouldn't they do such a good thing? Port Mordor. A large ship docked near the port, and there was an endless stream of people everywhere. Sisters, slow down. Edu helped a young woman with a baby to walk down the deck, and soon a team of law enforcement came to escort them. Their destination was not the port, but the city of Mordor in front of them. Many people looked around curiously. The first impression they had of the port was not how lively and prosperous it was, but it was quite clean and tidy. Compared to the city in their memory, it was too clean and tidy. There was no garbage on the ground, and there was no obvious stench of crowded people. There was only the faint smell of the sea in the air. Sister, look. It's the temple. It's magnificent. It's magnificent. The most striking buildings in Port Mordor were undoubtedly the Temple of Wealth and the Temple of Sea. These two churches seemed to have begun to be dissatisfied recently. The Temple of Wealth was decorated with a golden light, and the outer walls were painted with a layer of gold paint. The Temple of Wealth had an obvious advantage in terms of wealth. However, the Temple of Sea also had its own advantages, there were a lot of treasures on the seabed. It was very easy to get some luminous pearls and corals. During this time, the two temples were fighting openly and secretly to suppress each other, and the battle for believers was also quite fierce. Across the port there was a flat paved road. Many people were secretly observing this group of refugees. The characteristics of the half-elves were quite obvious, but no one disturbed them. They only occasionally looked at them curiously. In the team responsible for escorting them, George saw the legendary evil drow. Or it should be said that they were half-drow. These legendary evil existences had cold expressions, and they simply ignored other people. They just strictly or even harshly carried out their tasks. They hardly talked to others except for orders. George didn't know if it was his own illusion, but he saw a trace of panic in the eyes of these drow warriors. But it was not the kind of fear but a hidden panic. This hidden emotion made them very serious and harsh, meticulously carrying out orders, as if they were worried that they would be replaced. The city of Mordor finally appeared in front of them. In the distance they could see the reclaimed land and there were green crops in the fields. This scene full of vitality made them have better hope for the future. However, there was a sudden panic in front of them, and there were the screams and cries of women and children. George instantly pressed his hand on the hilt of his sword and was ready to fight. Roar! A dull dragon's roar echoed in everyone's ears. On the city wall of Mordor, a behemoth figure appeared. Its cold pupils glanced at these small humans, and then it flapped its wings violently and rose into the air. The Quetzalcoatlus with a wingspan of nearly 10 meters circled above them, and then flew in the direction of the sea. George's legs trembled slightly. The scene just now not only shocked him but many people around him also cried. Compared with the huge Quetzalcoatlus in front of them, the orcs' wolves were just like puppies. The guards did not change at all. They seemed to be very familiar with this Quetzalcoatlus. Soon the team was appeased. They entered Mordor from the south gate. George couldn't help but turn his head and look in the direction where the Quetzalcoatlus flew. For a moment, his heart was surging and he murmured, "Is this Mordor city?" Chapter 485. Mordor City. After walking into the city, many people could not help but show a look of surprise on their faces. It was not that everything in front of them was so shocking, but what they saw in their eyes was too neat. The smooth and clean road was lined with dug drainage canals on both sides. There was empty land next to it, some of which had been planted with flowers and plants. Although this city was not as big as Autumnfall, the road was wider than Autumnfall. It seemed that it had only recently been divided into two roads from the middle. From this point of view, it could be felt that the owner of this city had already arranged for it. Spacious roads, clean ground, neat houses. Even the half-elves who were a little particular about their living environment had to admit that this was the cleanest, neatest and most orderly city they had ever seen and could imagine. Maybe what the sailors said was true. My Lord Soren was really obsessed with cleanliness and had strict requirements for order. It was said that if you were caught urinating and defecating anywhere in the port of Mordor, not only would you be fined, but you would also be hung up and beaten. Otherwise, the habit of those who came from other places and casually found a dark corner to pee would not have been forcibly changed so quickly. No matter what the people of this era thought, Soren would never allow people to urinate and defecate anywhere in his city. He had built so many public toilets. If they dared to urinate and defecate anywhere, he would even cut off their tools. On both sides of the neat and spacious road were rows of brick houses. Some of them had already been occupied. The area of each brick house was not large, only about 2 rooms, but the layout was quite reasonable. There was also a 2-meter-long land in front of the house to plant something. There were more people living in the south of the city. Most of them were civilians. Other places were very empty. Many houses were empty. It seemed that they were reserved. No one was allowed to get close to the barracks. The city lord's mansion was also a forbidden area for ordinary people. However, they could come and go at will in the square. The guards told them that they could not go to those places, and those places belonged to the forbidden area. Then they placed them in a house. Of course, it was not a house distribution. This was the wealth of Mordor City. Soon, people dressed as clerks came to register their names. The original families were still the same. They would be given food that was barely enough to survive every day. However, if they wanted to eat something better or if they wanted to own a house and a family of their own here, they would be given a chance. Then they had to work. No one in this world could reap without sowing. Everything in the city of Mordor was established by order. There are many kinds of jobs. Those who had skills could choose their craft. Bricklayers, craftsmen, and blacksmiths had an advantage in this aspect. Women who knew how to sew also had an advantage. It didn't matter if they didn't have any skills. They could work as coolies or as farmers. They didn't get much money for their daily work. The most they got was 10 copper dirhams, but they would use some food as compensation. It was also possible to record the work into points instead of coins. These things called work points could be used to exchange for houses and land. Although he had just arrived, George quickly discovered that the natives here were all here to record work points. It seemed like very few people chose currency as their reward. Land. Hearing this word, George's eyes lit up instantly. For a civilian like him, nothing was more attractive than land. If he could get a piece of land, then his sister would have something to rely on for the rest of her life. At least she wouldn't have to worry about starving. To get the land deed, one must be recognized by the city hall. All the land in Mordor City belonged to the city lord. There were only 2 ways for a private person to buy it. One was to buy it with work points obtained from labor. After reaching a certain standard, part of it could be paid with currency. The second was to buy it with military merits. After obtaining a certain amount of military merits, part of it could be paid with currency. Money alone couldn't buy the land here. Many people in the port of Mordor wanted to buy a piece of land here but couldn't. Although this island was not small. But all the land belonged to the Lord Sauron. Although the port of Mordor was very large, it was now almost divided by the Temple of Wealth, the Temple of Sea, and the Chamber of Commerce. The second phase of the development of the port of Mordor was firmly in the hands of Sauron. Without his order, no one could continue to expand the land. There was a plain outside the city. A large number of slaves had already dug irrigation ditches and connected them directly to the river in the island. Originally, the land that was reclaimed for the first time should be relatively barren, but because of some magical fertilizer, this year's harvest seemed to be very good. Now 1/3 of the land outside the city of Mordor had become privately owned. Most of it was exchanged with military merits and kindler. Only a small part was exchanged by foremen, officials, and ordinary civilians. It was said that many pirates were saving money recently, preparing to put together military merits and private savings to get a few acres of land. If it was in the past, this was definitely something that the pirates would never think of. The spoils of war that they obtained and the rewards that they received were either spent on gambling in taverns or on prostitutes. It was said that a pirate named Stephen had started it. First, he used his military exploits to exchange for a house and land. Then he brought in his lover from outside. The scene of his wife and children together stimulated many old men. Many pirates who were around 30 years old took out their savings and military exploits to exchange for land and houses. Chapter Stephen's Day. Military merits in Mordor were very valuable. There were special clerks here who were responsible for counting military merits. Any military merits could be directly exchanged for kindler, but it seemed that no one would do so at present. Military merits could be exchanged directly in the city hall, but it was not a human who was responsible for crossing out the military merits, but a steel golem. Its task was to count all the changes in military merits. The work points obtained from labor were very small, so soldiers might be able to exchange for a house after a few battles, while ordinary people might need to work for 2 or 3 years. Edu thought about his skills and felt that he might be able to earn some military merits. It was said that the clerks were planning to change the recording method and were going to exchange all the work points for contribution points. This was to recognize a person's contribution to Mordor. After reaching a certain level, it was possible to obtain the status of honorary citizen and enjoy higher status and convenience in many aspects. There were no nobles in Mordor at present. Even those pirate leaders could not be regarded as nobles. Sir Sauron did not seem to have any plans to infect nobles for the time being. The maintenance of the city was all the responsibility of officials and the City Hall Council. Officials were officials, but officials were not nobles. In this strange but vibrant city, Edu saw too many novel but better systems. A day passed. Edu and the others were quickly settled down. Because they belonged to the same family when they were registered, Edu, his sister, and 2 other survivors from the same village were assigned to live in a house. The living environment was a bit narrow and crowded, but they were very satisfied for now. The city hall allocated some simple daily necessities, which could barely support them for a while. Mordor advocated relying on one's own hands for everything. So the next day Edu found a job for himself. Although he had good fighting skills, he needed to be assessed to join the army. He needed to have a certain amount of contribution in Mordor, so he planned to work hard for a while. After all, he was also an advanced warrior, and his strength was much greater than other adult men. It was not a problem for him to earn twice the food and work points in a day. Originally, he planned to let his sister take care of the children at home, but this stubborn woman refused. She had learned the craft of tailoring and insisted on supporting herself. Half-elves had some skills. They were much more dexterous than other humans, so it was not difficult to find a job. There were too many tasks in Mordor City. A large number of houses were still being expanded, a large number of daily necessities had to be made, a large number of building materials had to be transported, a large number of land needed to be reclaimed, a large number of irrigation ditches had to be dug, and so on. Almost everywhere needed manpower, and the demand for labor was stronger than any other city. Idu's job was to carry wood. Because this job was piecework, he could get 1 work point for carrying 50 logs a day. 1 work point could be exchanged for a pound of food, which was enough for a family to eat. Ha! George let out a low growl and carried the log that was as thick as an adult's waist on his shoulder. Others had to work together to carry a log, but he was able to carry it quickly by relying on his great strength. A log was about 300 or 400 pounds. If he wasn't born with great strength and trained as a warrior, he probably wouldn't be able to carry it alone. In just one morning, Idu carried 60 or 70 logs back and forth. Although he couldn't keep up with his physical strength in the afternoon, he had collected more than 120 pieces. The foreman in charge of registration looked at him in surprise, then nodded to indicate that he could rest. Idu ate at the construction site for lunch and dinner. Cheap black bread with fresh fish soup, which seemed to be shark meat. Anyway, it tasted good. For Idu, he was satisfied to be able to eat meat. In the evening, Idu exchanged a pound of food and then returned to his residence with 1 work point. If I eat at the construction site every day, I can probably eat this food for half a month. Tomorrow I should be able to get 3 work points. 1 work point can be exchanged for 10 copper dirhams. Maybe the day after tomorrow, I can buy some cloth for my sister's children to make clothes. Idu muttered as he walked, "What a novel way of counting." The other people in the crowded small courtyard had returned. Although they had been busy all day, they could still hear the laughter of children. Most people chose to exchange work points for food. Carrying heavy food, they also became more at ease. As long as they worked hard, they could feed their families. This kind of life could make them feel satisfied and happy. Because they didn't ask for much. Chapter 486. Night fell. The city hall only allocated a small amount of lamp oil to them, and many people were reluctant to light oil lamps. Night, there were women drawing water to wash clothes. After the sister finished feeding her nephew, she coaxed him to sleep. The little guy was very clever, and it seemed that he rarely cried. George came back with a bucket of water from the well outside. Seeing his sister motioning him to take off his clothes and wash them, he simply found a corner and washed them casually. The daily necessities were public, and it was a bit troublesome for 4 or 5 people to use them. George still had some money in his hand, and he planned to buy some daily necessities in 2 days. There was a noise in the small courtyard next door. George glanced at the sister who had just coaxed his nephew to sleep. He stretched his muscles and planned to quietly go and have a look. Mordor City had a curfew, but they could not go out at night. It was fine to walk back and forth in the alley of the residential area. Someone had made it clear to them when they came. Prayers and praises could be heard in their ears. Those were the devout believers of the church. Although the first day in Mordor City was very busy, for many civilians who had just escaped from the war, this busy and peaceful life was worthy of gratitude. They never expected to get something for nothing. They only hoped to make a good life with their hands. Congratulations, old Peter. Congratulations on moving to a new house. Come on, have a drink. I wish you a meteoric rise as soon as possible. There were many people's voices in George's ears. The courtyard next door was very lively. Occasionally there were patrolling guards passing by, but they just took a glance and left. There were many people in the courtyard, and George even knew some of them. Standing in the crowd was old Peter, a blacksmith in his 40s. George had seen him in Wuxia City, and he had repaired his equipment. What's going on? George saw a table in the courtyard with wine, meat, and some daily necessities. Old Peter was thanking the people who congratulated him. When he saw George, he immediately pulled him over and insisted on buying him a drink. He also boasted about his strength to the people next to him, saying that he had seen him kill a fierce wolf with his own eyes. George did not refuse. He took the glass and took a sip. Then he understood what happened. Old Peter was a blacksmith, and his craftsmanship should be quite good. He had been blacksmithing for decades. He had been learning how to forge since he was a child. His ancestors were all blacksmiths. On the first day he came to Motor City, he was given an important position by the Ordnance Department. On the first day he was assigned a house and received a settlement fee. Today was to say goodbye to the others. Tomorrow he would bring his family and move to an independent courtyard 3 streets away. In the future he would be a blacksmith in the Ordnance Department, and his status would probably be much higher than these people. He estimated that in 2 years he would be able to use his contribution to exchange for a piece of land. A blacksmith. George couldn't help but reveal a trace of envy on his face. It seemed that people with good skills wouldn't be at a disadvantage no matter where they went. From their words, George learned that there were quite a few people like old Peter. People with good skills were assigned to other places. Some were assigned to the armory, some were assigned to the brick-baking factory, and some were assigned to other places. Those who were selected because of their craftsmanship immediately became superior to others. The next day they were given a new courtyard to settle down in, and the remuneration they received was much higher than the others. George couldn't help but feel envious because he also wanted his sister and nephew to have a better life. It didn't take long for people to disperse. After a hard day's work, many people fell asleep as soon as they fell into bed. George also went back to rest soon. His sister was reluctant to light the oil lamp, so she was sewing clothes for him in the small courtyard with needle and thread. From time to time she would talk to the woman living in the next room. The night gradually darkened. The weather in May was not bad. George slept directly in the small courtyard. The biggest difference from the past was that he slept very well tonight. Because for him the terrible war was over. The night passed quickly. As soon as he got up the next day George rushed to work. When he first came here there was nothing. Although the city hall gave some relief supplies, those things couldn't last for long. No one felt that the city hall gave out less. On the contrary, many people were very grateful. For George, as long as he had a job he could support himself and his family. There were many people who thought like him. 3 days passed in a blink of an eye. In just 3 days the small courtyard where George lived had changed a lot. All the pots and pans were ready. He bought some cloth to make a new set of clothes for his nephew. What he wanted to do most now was to have a small courtyard of his own. The room where the refugees were settled was too crowded. There was no private space at all. His sister had to hide in the room when she wanted to take a bath. It was obviously difficult to change a house by working as a coolie. George still planned to find a way to join the army. In terms of personal strength, he believed that he was not much worse than those guards. People had a strong ability to adapt. In just a few days, many people adapted to life in Mordor City. They worked at sunrise and rested at sunset. Their lives were very regular and orderly. As long as they participated in work, they would be provided with 2 meals. Basically, they would be able to eat meat often. At first, people exchanged their work points for food, but gradually many people began to save up like the natives of this city, hoping that one day they could save enough to change a house or some land. It was said that the wasteland outside was much cheaper, so many people planned to reclaim it themselves after getting the wasteland. George was originally a civilian, so farming was naturally not a problem for him. As an advanced warrior he had enough strength. If possible he hoped to have some land next year. Although he had nothing now, he was full of confidence for the future. In a blink of an eye, a week had passed. George seemed to be getting more and more accustomed to the busy and fulfilling life in Mordor City. The city had been constantly expanding and new changes could be seen every day. The road in the east had been built for hundreds of meters. Some flowers and plants were planted near the square. How many acres of land had been reclaimed in the south? Ditches had been dug there. The wood in the southwest had been cut down. Now they had to walk a little longer to carry the wood. Anyway, it was all very trivial things, but everyone here seemed to be very busy. Even the officials and foremen ran their legs off every day. The laws and regulations here were very strict. Even if the officials did not complete the task, they would be punished. Occasionally he could see some slaves. The living environment of these slaves was much worse than theirs. Many people were very satisfied and grateful. It was said that another slave had gained the status of a free man yesterday, which was quite strange. Because in the outside world, slaves would always be slaves. From time to time, George could see the Quetzalcoatlus flying over Mordor City. It would fly in the direction of the sea every day and then fly back before dark. Perhaps people were used to it, so they were no longer afraid. They had never heard of the Quetzalcoatlus attacking people. After the initial fear, Many people felt happy and excited after seeing it, thinking that it was a symbol of luck. However, no one was allowed to approach it. George heard from the guards that it was the pet of the little princess of Mordor City. No one had seen the little princess yet, but it was said that she was a very powerful spellcaster. Occasionally, a mysterious witch could be seen in Mordor City. She was the mistress of Mordor City. Every time she appeared, she would only assign new expansion tasks to the officials of the city hall. Since the establishment of Mordor City, the pace of expansion had not stopped. George was lucky to see the mysterious witch. She was a beautiful and noble witch who rarely appeared in front of ordinary people. The core of George's life was still around his sister and his nephew who was just 1 year old. As the only man in the family, he had the responsibility and obligation to make his sister live a better life in an unfamiliar environment. As an advanced warrior, his strength, which was far beyond ordinary people, finally attracted the attention of others. He got a chance to enter the city guard. George decided to seize this opportunity. So every day after work he would hone his martial arts skills. There were many strong guys in Mordor City, but George also had his own advantages. He was only 20 years old this year, and there was a lot of room for growth in the future. In the evening, George returned to his residence with a piece of linen. It was time for his sister to fill in a new dress. The one he was wearing was torn because of work, so it was better to make a change of clothes. From the top of Mordor City he could see the bustling port. It seemed to be two different worlds from Mordor City. Some people longed for the prosperity of the port, but George preferred the peaceful life of Mordor City. The next day, new half-elves were sent here. George met them in the morning. He saw a trace of panic in their eyes, which made him smile. Maybe when he first came here, he and his sister were the same as these people in front of him. However, they would soon adapt to life here. Because they were all civilians. They were born to rely on hard work to support themselves, and in Mordor City hard work could make their lives better and better. George planned to buy some meat back for his sister after today's work. Maybe it was because she had been working hard recently, and his sister's milk was not enough for his little nephew. Thinking of that 1-year-old little fellow with big black eyes, the corners of his mouth couldn't help but reveal a trace of a smile. He looked at the house on the other side of the street. Compared to the crowded environment here, it was much cleaner. George could not help clenching his fist. If he could pass the assessment and join the army, it would not take long for him to move into a small independent yard with his sister. Although it was a brick house, it was not very big. But for them it was a new home, a starting point of hope. This was Mordor City. A place full of vitality, and hope. Although he had just arrived here, George had a sense of identity with it. This was the power of order. Chapter 487. Autumn-Fall. The fleet docked near the Agate River was ready. The breeze by the river brought the smell of mud, and the slogans of the sailors came from behind. Soren looked at the distant autumn-fall, shook his head and sighed and slowly said, "Let's set sail." It was over. Everything here was over. After more than a month's delay, he finally sent all the believers he needed back to Mordor City. Now those who insisted on staying in autumn-fall were not worth his time. As for their future fate, Soren was not interested in paying too much attention to it. After all, because of his arrival, the orc army had been hit hard twice in a row. Eugene had to slow down under the pressure of Soren, which indirectly bought time for autumn-fall. As for who was the real winner in the end, Soren was not interested at all. Because he knew that the time of troubles was coming. "My lord." An old man in a bishop's costume came to Soren. He was one of the few surviving bishops of the church, a high-grade priest with a profession level of more than 16. He humbly bowed his head and said, "All the believers have been sent away. But there are still many people in autumn-fall. If we fight for it, we may be able to persuade them to leave." Soren turned to look at him and shook his head. "No need. The power of the nobles will not sit back and watch us take away the others. Besides, a greater disaster is coming. I foresee that the gods will come to the mortal world. At that time we will face greater challenges." "The gods will come to the mortal world?" Bishop Felwood was shocked when he heard this and murmured, "How is it possible?" Soren looked at him silently. At this time, it was no problem to reveal a little about the Avatar crisis in advance. Because there had been weak gods appearing one after another, it was estimated that many powerful legendary figures had already guessed a little. The impact of the gods coming to the material plane was quite huge. Just look at Soren's current ability. He barely reached the standard of a weak god, but he had the terrible power to slaughter a city. When the Avatar crisis really broke out, gods, demons, devils, and ancient evil creatures would all come out. If there was a conflict between them, it would affect the whole plane. You may leave. Soren waved his hand gently and disappeared in the blink of an eye. A god should not have too much contact with his followers. Otherwise there would not be enough mystery. Although the priest in front of him was a servant who helped him herd his believers, Soren was not ready to say too much to them. After all, Soren could not give them divine spells at present. Strictly speaking, he was still at the stage of a false god. The church was left to the psionic warlock, Butterfly. With her abilities, managing a church was a piece of cake. Loya City? Soren took one last look at the direction of Autumnfall and shook his head slightly. The divine artifact has fallen into my hands. I don't know if the gnolls will turn against the orcs. No matter what, I hope this city can hold on. As a lawful evil person, Soren actually hated the arrival of chaos, so he didn't mind using his own power to make some changes. This time, more than 20,000 people were transported away from Autumnfall. Compared to the nearly 1 million half-elves, this was actually a very inconspicuous part. However, Autumnfall only had a population of a few 100,000. Half-elves were very common on the road, and the number of people that a city could accommodate was also limited. If it weren't for Autumnfall taking in a large number of fleeing civilians, the population in the city would only be about a few tens of thousands. In this case, those who were willing to go with Soren were basically believers of the church. In order to transport them away, Soren used a lot of manpower and material resources. But it was all worth it. Because with the arrival of the Avatar crisis, Soren's prestige may be greatly reduced. If the sea goddess appeared in the mortal world, he would not dare to say that he was the king of the sea. His ability to mobilize the pirates would certainly not be as good as now. After all, the sea goddess was the master of the sea. The terrible turmoil would affect the entire material plane, and the role that financial resources could play was far less than now. The later Soren's influence would be worse, and it would be much more difficult to make such a big scene. In fact, this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, because no matter what Soren did now, only other forces were watching. But in the future, if Soren dared to do so, other gods would be watching. This was a completely different concept. A warship sailed along the Agate River to the sea. The half-elf First Mate's dragon-headed warship had returned to Raging Sand Island. It was estimated that the first batch of believers had arrived at Mordor. And my lord. The slim figure of the psionic warlock with a veil appeared beside Soren. She bowed slightly to show respect and then slowly said, "All the believers have been appeased. Telepathy has also been planted, and they will be very quiet on the way. The priests have all been arranged. The first batch of priests has been sent to Mordor, and they will help manage these ordinary people. Some of the other priests will stay on Raging Sand Island, and then they will go back with us. Master. Although these priests are very obedient now, this is only temporary. If you can't give them divine spells, I'm afraid their faith will be shaken. I don't know what the Master's next plan is." Soren turned and looked at her. He had nothing to hide from the future chief priest of his church. He slowly said, "Although the prayers of the believers have given me some divine power, it seems that I have not fully reached the standard of a god. Maybe it's because I can't connect to the kingdom of the original gods. Under normal circumstances, as a god, I should also have the ability of a legendary priest. But in fact, I can't use divine spells now. No matter what profession a god was, even a pure warrior could have the ability of a legendary priest. However, the priest's ability obtained in this way did not consume the divine spell slots, but directly consumed the divine power of the god. If a god had a priest level, it was equivalent to having two sets of divine spells. One was the divine spell slots brought about by their profession level, and the other was the divine spells that could be used by their own divine power. Soren had accumulated 3 divine power points, but he had not obtained any divine spells. He didn't know why, but it might be related to the fact that he had not officially become a god. The psionic warlock heard this and nodded slightly, then slowly said, "Perhaps my master should hold his ceremony as soon as possible. Without officially becoming a god, there is no power to control the laws. In fact, my master, you are not even a false god now because many false gods can also give divine spells to a small number of believers. You now rely on your powerful force and your own power to control the church, but divine spells are the foundation of the church. Priests who have lost their divine spells may still join the church of other gods." Soren nodded and said, "I know. But maybe it's not my fault. Maybe I chose the wrong time to do it. Don't you see that these priests are not too surprised to lose their divine spells? I'm afraid that more and more priests are losing their ability to use divine spells. The stars in the sky are getting dimmer and dimmer. The gods rarely respond to the prayers of mortals. I'm afraid that only some devout priests can use divine spells now. I have a hunch that something important is about to happen. Soren looked up at the sky. He didn't know when it started, but the moon in the sky seemed to have dimmed a lot. It seemed that as the first batch of stars lost their brilliance, the moon also became weaker. Mistress of the silver moon. There was a strange expression on Soren's face. He turned to look at the psionic warlock behind him and said slowly, "Maybe I can't give divine spells now, but if I want to hold the investiture ceremony, I must become a true god directly. That's the only way. We won't arouse the hostility of others." True god. The psionic warlock trembled when she heard this. She then bowed and said, "My master, do you have the qualifications to become a true god?" Soren shook his head and said, "Not yet. But I'm almost there. True god. Divinity, divine title, and divinity. When these three elements were all sufficient, the time for him to become a true god would soon arrive. Strictly speaking, Soren could become a god at any time now. But if he became a god in his current state, then he would be a standard, false god, because he didn't have the ability of minor divinity. There was a limit to the power of the gods. True god and false god were two different standards. One was the existence that was truly qualified to exercise the power of the gods, while the other was the foreskin company that was forcefully supported by half-baked people. The former could fulfill the responsibilities and obligations that gods should fulfill, while the latter could completely deceive and oppress the believers. For example, they couldn't receive the souls of believers at all. The demigod vampire was a standard, false god. The power of his divinity was not up to standard. Taking the god of half-elves and rogues, as a goal was to advance himself to the realm of a true god. It was also because he became a god as a false god, that his church didn't love him, justice regarded him as an enemy, and evil regarded him as a traitor. This was a very serious matter. Because once he was labeled as a false god, it would be very difficult to get rid of it in the future. This was a stain that both justice and evil valued. The prayers of believers were a huge amount of information. If the prayers of priests were added, the burden on the gods would also be great. Only when the three elements of divinity, divine title, and divinity were fully met could the gods really deal with all this. If they didn't meet the standards, they would become like Soren when he first came into contact with prayer. They might go crazy or have their minds completely distorted. A false god was a false god. It was like flying a plane without a driver's license. This kind of behavior was very disgusting in the eyes of the gods, and the consequences were much more serious than driving without a license. Most false gods would have some kind of distortion because of their insufficient foundation. Even if they succeeded in advancing to the realm of true god in the future, this stain would remain on them because they violated the rules of the gods. This was the problem of timing. When all the conditions were met to become a god, then you would be a true god. Everything was according to the rules of order. First, you would have the ability of a god, then you would get the qualification of a god. And if you couldn't wait, and if any of the conditions didn't meet the standards of the gods, and then hurriedly tried to become a god, then you would violate the rules of the gods and be directly labeled as a false god. Once you were labeled as a false god, no matter if it was a righteous or evil god, they would not like it. They would remember who challenged the rules of the gods. Even if you advanced to a true god in the future, this kind of feeling would remain in the influence of many gods. Because they would think, "Look, it's that guy. He forced himself to become a god without meeting the standards of the gods." Soren naturally wouldn't choose the path of a false god. This was a fundamental problem that involved the credibility of the gods. It was also the first impression that other gods would have when you became a god. Because as long as you didn't leave the first impression that you were a false god, even the gods of the enemy camp would recognize your identity. They would say that you were evil, but they wouldn't say that you were a fake because you were qualified to be on equal footing with them. Chapter 488. The biggest difference was to ascend as a true god. It was to be recognized by other gods, and it was even possible for some gods' incarnations to congratulate him. Just like the vampiric demigod who was not recognized by any gods, and even made a blood-red moon in the sky. Although it seemed to be the aura of a true god, in fact it was just a pretentious act. This could be seen from the fact that the Lady of the Night, Evil, Son of the Night, and so on, who had great divine power, simply ignored him. If the Lady of the Night said a word, no one would dare to touch the demigod vampire. If Soren ascended as a god, then it was very likely that a god's incarnation would appear. That would be the sea goddess. Because she was the direct beneficiary of Soren's rise, the expansion of the sea temple in the human world was completely caused by Soren's influence alone. The second possible god's incarnation was the goddess of wealth. From the outer islands to the south coast, to the eastern kingdom, to Arendelle, the prosperity of trade had a great impact on the goddess of wealth, and this prosperous trade was because of Soren's rule. When Soren became a god, this goddess might also do him the honor of descending as an incarnation. Of course, the premise of all this was that Sauron had to ascend as a true god, and not as a false god. In front of him was the endless sea. The trade winds from the southern rainforest made the trade in the eastern sea prosperous. This was the best time of the year to go to the eastern sea. As long as the sails were set, they could reach the eastern kingdom. On the bottom of the sea, there were schools of fish swimming back and forth. As the climate warmed up, these fish would gradually return to their original sea areas. The blue sky made people feel relaxed and happy, and the endless sea always made people feel its magnificence. At the same time, a fleet was also sailing towards the south. This place was very close to Raging Sand Island. Your Excellency. The half-elf first mate appeared in front of Soren and knelt down on one knee. The materials you asked for have been prepared, and the elites are all on standby at Snake Island. Soren turned around and nodded. Very good. Tell them to get ready. They will sail back to Mordor City with me in 3 days, and then set off to find the Treasure Island. Treasure Island. When he heard this name, the half-elf first mate was stunned. He vaguely felt that this name was a little familiar, but he did not have a specific impression of it. This should be an island in the depths of the outer islands, but no one knew where it was. In the legends of the South Coast pirates, there had always been a saying about Treasure Island. That was, in the territory of the Aborigines of the outer islands, there was a very, very valuable island. On the left side of the island was a huge silver mine, and on the right side of the island was a huge gold mine. The legend of Treasure Island was more or less like this. Since ancient times, many pirates had tried to find the location of Treasure Island, but no one had ever found it. Overseas was rich in minerals to begin with. The number of gold and silver mines was obviously denser than the mainland. Basically, it was possible to find smaller gold mines in places where there were large indigenous tribes. This was also the reason why the Aborigines were very rich. Treasure Island was the most valuable island in the legends because there were 2 large mineral veins here. It was said that the development of this island was enough to buy a country. Unfortunately, no one had ever found it. Do you know where the Real Treasure Island is? The half-elf first mate was shocked, and then a burst of ecstasy. That was an amazing wealth that could buy a country. If they really took it, they would not have to worry about not having enough money to spend for the rest of their lives. As for the Aborigines on Treasure Island, the half-elf first mate was not worried at all. As long as they could determine the location of the island, no matter how many Aborigines there were, they could mobilize pirates to take it down. Raging Sand Island. Soren silently looked at the nautical chart in front of him. His fingers moved gently on the unmarked unknown area as if he was looking for a certain general direction. He had considered Treasure Island as early as when he went overseas. But at that time Treasure Island was a place that he could not take down. Not to mention the large indigenous tribes and the demigods they served, just the monsters on the way to Treasure Island were enough to wipe out Soren's entire army. On the route to Treasure Island there was a very dangerous strait. There was currently the largest octopus monster that Soren had ever seen in history. Just one tentacle was hundreds of meters long. Back then they had paid a heavy price to kill it. This was the first time the adventurers had killed a super colossal boss. Soren wanted to go to Treasure Island, so he had to pass through this monster's territory. Wealth was one of the reasons why Soren went to Treasure Island, but he was actually quite rich now. Especially when the pirate minions were preparing to settle down in Mordor, a lot of their private money was handed over to Soren. In fact, another important reason why he went to Treasure Island was to obtain divinity and the power of divinity. Soren's current divinity was 27 points, and he was 3 points away from a lesser divinity. At that time he would be able to increase all his attributes by 1 again. This was a great increase in his ability. Then there were the demigods and demigods on Treasure Island. This was the easiest way for Soren to obtain divinity. Dealing with these indigenous demigods and demigods was at least much easier than challenging the real gods. Soren was currently 2 points away from obtaining the Lesser Divinity. This was the same as the Lesser Divinity, which could increase all his attributes by 1. As a result, Soren's attributes were equivalent to +2 at the same time. At this time he had truly entered the realm of the gods and had the power of the gods. At the same time, he had reached the standard of transforming into the form of the saint. All attributes +2. This was a huge attraction for Soren, and it was also the key for him to stand firm in the future of the Avatar crisis. Because if he continued to improve, he was afraid that he would have to challenge other gods. There was a slight sound of footsteps, and soon the tall figure of the psionic warlock appeared in front of Soren. She bowed slightly and said, "My lord, the things you arranged have been done. The next thing is the investiture ceremony and the military parade. I'm afraid it will take a month or 2 to prepare. I don't know what my lord's arrangements are." Soren retracted his finger from the nautical chart. He gently rolled it up, then looked up at the psionic warlock in front of him. He fell into deep thought. Soren tapped his fingers and thought for a while, then said in a deep voice, "Investiture in a low-key way, parade in a high-profile way." In an instant, the psionic warlock's eyes brightened, and then she humbly bowed and said, "My lord is wise." Chapter 489. Low-key investiture, high-profile military parade. Low-key investiture was to avoid attracting too much attention from other gods' churches, and it also implied that as a new god, he did not have much ambition. This was quite important because Soren's investiture prayer was completed by the psionic warlock. In the investiture prayer of the demigod vampire, there was hunting and fear, plus a blood-red moon. It could be said that it was very high-profile. Soren currently only planned to use the half-elf priesthood, which basically had no conflict with other gods. In order to avoid attracting too much hostility from the gods, Soren must be as low-key as possible before the outbreak of the Avatar crisis. When all the gods came down and fought among themselves, Soren could expand from the half-elf priesthood to any direction. But in this case, if he added too many priesthoods, then once the Avatar crisis broke out, it was possible that some gods who coveted his power would directly attack him, such as the Shadow Lord. The priesthood of the gods could be evolved from the power of the domain. Soren had the domain of fear, so he could be the source of power for other gods who had mastered the domain of fear. Adding the words hunting, night, fear, shadow, and so on to the investiture prayer was definitely not wanting to die fast enough. As for the high-profile military parade, it was very simple. Investiture could be low-key, but when showing strength, it must be high-profile. This was equivalent to Soren showing his fists and muscles to the people who secretly peeped at him on the south coast and even other continents when he was investiture, telling them that he was not easy to bully, and that they had to think about what they wanted to do. When the real military parade was held, it would not be just these pirates who came out for a stroll. Soren, Gloria, Fallen Witch, a god-level rogue and 2 legendary-level witches, the 3 of them would stand as legendary figures on the stage. At the same time, Soren would also send an invitation to the Princess Royal of Arendelle, and to the Eye of the North of the Northern Witch Council. Furthermore, he invited the experts of the mystic sect who controlled the Eastern Sea region. A military parade was never a place where a single person could stay at home and play around. Instead, Soren's elite troops had to be brought out for a walk. His high-end combat power had to be displayed, and his powerful allies had to be invited to support him. This was the only way to truly intimidate potential enemies. Since Soren had given them a general direction, the rest could be left to the psionic warlock. The time was about 5 days later. Soren led the fleet back to the outer islands. The city of Mordor was more lively than before. Standing on the mast, one could see that the city of Mordor had expanded more than twice as much as before. Soren had designed the city according to modern standards. From the underground drainage system to the distribution of the various areas, he had already thought of a rough model before the city was built. Soren couldn't spend so much effort just to build a village for fun. The final form of Mordor City was a large city that could accommodate 200,000 people. Finally, with the expansion of the city, Mordor City and Port Mordor would be connected. But that should be a long time in the future. For now, it was better for Mordor City and Port Mordor to be separated. Soren needed to maintain the atmosphere in the city. There were more than 20,000 outsiders. Mordor City suddenly became crowded. There was basically no problem with food and supplies. Soren had begun to stockpile them a long time ago. Although he had the ability to easily feed all the half-elf refugees, he didn't give it to them casually. Instead, he asked all the civilians to exchange it with work. This was a process of equivalent exchange. The half-elf civilians basically had skills. Even if they didn't have any skills, the stronger ones could go to logging, and the weaker ones could go to reclaim the land. No matter what they did in Mordor City, as long as they were willing to do it, they could fill their stomachs and slowly accumulate a little wealth. My lord. The psionic warlock came behind Soren and bowed slightly. The planning of the temple has been completed. The location is near the central square. If you want to complete it before the parade, you may need to recruit a lot of labor, and at the same time, it will require a lot of financial resources. There is no problem with the priests. When we all arrive at Mordor City, we can start preparing for the daily prayer ceremony. The temple was the most basic thing. Most of the priests had only come to Mordor now, and the real formal prayer day had to be done slowly. Soren looked back at her and said slowly, "I will mobilize an army for you. The city hall will give you 300,000 Kindler coins. You can decide how to use it." Soren was very rich now. The specific amount could not be calculated because many of them were real estate. However, as the farmlands and houses were sold, the amount of liquid wealth also increased rapidly. Soren never intended to give land directly. Military merits could be used as part of the land exchange, but most pirates used their private money and military merits to exchange for dozens of acres of land. At present, only about 1/3 of the land outside Mordor City was still in the hands of Soren. Some of the wasteland was bought by the pirates below. These guys used to eat, drink, gamble, or do other things when they were rich. It was a good thing that they started to settle down and buy property. Understood. The psionic warlock smiled and nodded. Soren looked at her, got up and walked towards Mordor City. When he came back again, there were more spies in the dark. After all, Port Mordor was a transit port, and Mordor City was Soren's private territory. There were too many forces in these caravans, and Soren's every move affected their minds. They should know everything that happened to the half-elves. For the rise of a new god, many forces were silent. It was not that they didn't want to move, but they didn't dare to move. Even the wife of the Duke of Red Dragon of the Principality of Rossard had been honest recently, and the other forces were naturally all waiting to see what would happen. After such a long time, Soren finally got a new legend. Battle of Autumnfall, Epic Battle. In the middle of May 1676 of the New Moon era, you intervened in the war between the half-elves and the half-orcs near Autumnfall. In this war you defeated the army of the half-orc chieftain Eugene twice, and thus alleviated the crisis of Autumnfall. Inigu, the king of the gnolls, also suffered a loss in your hands. Although this greatly improved your reputation, it also brought you new dangers. Legend level plus 8 legend level. After everything in Autumnfall, Soren's legend level finally reached 100 points. 100 legend level was an important watershed because in this case, Soren's name had basically spread throughout the continent. From now on, the difficulty of him getting legend level would increase sharply. If he wanted to continue to improve his legend level, he would need to involve everything outside the plane. The higher the legend level, the more difficult it would be to improve it. In the end, he would have to let his existence spread throughout the multiverse. However, Soren's current legend level could barely reach the standard of a god. At least, it was much higher than when he was the demigod vampire. With the existence of the psionic warlock, Butterfly, Soren only needed to order a lot of things. He first went to see Vivian. The little girl's divine power was getting stronger and stronger. Now that a lot of the Sons of Fear had died, and as the Avatar crisis was getting closer and closer, the time for the resurrection of the Dreadlord was coming soon. Soren didn't know how long she would have to sleep, but looking at Vivian's current divine power, he was afraid that nearly half of the power of the Sons of Fear was converging towards her. There was not much Soren could do now. But if he became a god, there were a lot of things he could do. The power of the gods allowed him to face the Dreadlord directly, and he could even go to the bottomless abyss to end it. Night fell. Soren came to Gloria's laboratory. The progress of Phalanx research was still continuing, and the silver blade of Gith seemed to be about to be completed. That's what Gloria told him, just a little bit more and it would be completed. Soren didn't see the figure of the fallen witch. She should still be staying in the Shadow Plane to study the Wizard Tower. They had never been able to open the half-plane of the Wizard Tower from the outside. Maybe after Soren became a god, he could rely on the power of the gods to find an opportunity. After all, the ability of the Arcane Empire was too far ahead of them, and some things were difficult for them to crack. He only stayed in Mordor for one day. The next day, Soren led the fleet and set sail to the depths of the Outer Islands. The news was tightly sealed. No one knew where Soren was going, but seeing such a large-scale mobilization of the army, many people still felt uneasy. All the forces near the south coast were on alert. In the distance was the endless sea. Soren followed the route in his memory for 3 days and finally came to a dangerous sea. The blessing of the sea goddess had failed. From here on, the blessing of the sea goddess would not be able to dispel the deep-sea monsters because they were all changed by the energy radiation from the bottom of the sea. Even the sea goddess would find it difficult to control these mutated sea monsters. This was the sunken land. The destruction of the arcane empire created the terrible desert of death, and also made a continent completely sink to the bottom of the sea. There was energy radiation everywhere. The two most terrible places of energy radiation pollution in the entire material plane, one was in the depths of the desert of death, and the other was somewhere in this sea. These energy radiation was more serious than nuclear pollution, and nature had not been able to repair it for thousands of years. The fleet continued to move forward. When a black strait appeared in Soren's sight, he smiled because he finally found the right route to the treasure island. After sailing for another day, he could reach the legendary treasure island. Chapter 490. Bottomless Abyss, 422nd floor. In a barren desert, there were a large number of gnolls and many slaves who had fallen into the abyss. This place was originally called the Ruins of Azar, which used to be the territory of a powerful fallen angel. Unfortunately, he had fallen in the hands of a god slayer. Now the owner of this place was Yeenagu, the king of gnolls, who was the absolute ruler of the 422nd floor of the abyss. In this very vast abyss, the king of gnolls ruled a large number of gnoll servants and ghoul slaves. He enslaved these people to build a huge steel fortress for himself. From the desert to the east, one could see a huge body exposed on the surface of the earth. It was the body of a very ancient demon, the Storm Lord Obilus Barchid. The rise of the Tana-Re demons had killed this ancient demon and extracted its huge vitality from its withered body. Now, tens of millions of years had passed, and the pain of death of this ancient demon had continued. As an ancient demon born from the source of chaos, it had not really died yet. It was like a beached giant whale and part of its body stayed in this plane. Although he could no longer speak, Barchid still retained a fragment of his vast consciousness. If he communicated through telepathy, he would talk in a slow and melancholy tone, talking about an era before the birth of Tana-Re, about the rise and fall of the oldest demon. And a trusted frequent visitor might even hear Barchid say that demons didn't originate from the bottomless abyss, but instead migrated from some other place, after abandoning some evil creator race that had already disappeared in the long river of history. Yeenagu, the king of gnolls, was the most common visitor here. No one knew what he got from the mouth of the oldest demon, but since he came to the abyss, Yeenagu had been growing stronger day by day. He ruled a floor of the abyss, he conquered the ghoul king, he fought with the Tauren king Buffett, and he had a dangerous relationship with the succubus queen Mechanut. All this seemed to be destined to make countless enemies in the abyss. But in fact, until today, Yeenagu, the king of gnolls, was still alive. He did not fall in the conspiracy of other demon lords, and his territory was still slowly expanding. The ancient demon's body occasionally changed slightly, and its terrible power still interfered with this plane. Occasionally, there would be drastic weather changes here, which was the power of the powerful demon Obilus. On this plane, the remnants of the demon's body refused other visitors. Yeenagu's men would not let others approach easily, but occasionally, some strong men from the bottomless abyss would come here, praying for the guidance of power from the mouth of the oldest demon. Unfortunately, they still found nothing. Because recently, the remnant consciousness of this huge body became silent. It began to talk to no one. Even Yeenagu, the king of the gnolls, who had ruled the 422nd layer of the abyss for a long time, could not get any response from it. Following the plains, there was a huge steel fortress at the foot of the mountains. This was the city of Yeenagu, the most powerful steel fortress of the gnolls in the abyss. The only native people here were gnolls. The other races were either slaves or rations. In the center was a towering palace. Yeenagu spent less than half of the year here. Most of the time he was patrolling his territory. This was a demon lord who cared about his territory very much. He was familiar with every piece of his territory. Stupid. Incompetent. Trash. A dull roar echoed in the sky above the steel fortress. Countless gnoll servants trembled in the roar. Yeenagu's burly figure stood in the palace, looking at the black-haired gnoll kneeling in front of him. He roared, "You idiot! You can't even do this." The gnoll leader knelt at Yeenagu's feet. He opened his mouth to explain the strength of the enemy, but he was greeted by a three-headed flail. Blood and brains splattered. Yinagu glanced at the others coldly and said slowly, "Trash can only be fed to pets." Two servants in full armor appeared and dragged the body out of the hall. "My lord." An old gnoll holding a white bone staff appeared. He glanced at the blood on the ground and said slowly, "The succubus queen's army has attacked our border again. Many people have died at the hands of the glorious nuns." The glorious nuns. Yinagu frowned. The battle between him and the succubus queen had never stopped. The border conflicts had always been erupting. It hated those damned Radiance nuns. Because these glorious nuns were the creations of the succubus queen, Mechanut. They were the commanders of the succubus army and also a troublesome and cunning opponent. "Send the ghoul army as reinforcements." Yinagu glanced at the others and said slowly, "Let the gnoll executioners go to the border as well." The old gnoll wizard bowed and retreated. Soon, in this huge steel fortress, some of the closed gates were opened. Then, a black mass of ghouls rushed out and left under the leadership of some jackalans holding heavy flails. The war between the demon lords was never ending. As long as the succubus queen did not appear in person, Yinagu would not easily go to the front line because war was the main theme of the Abyss. But once the Abyss Lord personally participated in the war, the scale of the war would increase. A howling gust of wind blew in his face. Cristiana played with the thorny whip made of fine gold in her hand and crushed the head of the gnoll warrior on the ground with one foot. The scarlet brain and blood splashed on the black metal boots. She didn't seem to care that it would affect her amazing charm. As a newly awakened sister of glory, Cristiana's memory of her previous life was very vague. She only retained the instinct of being a high succubus and her loyalty and love to her mother, the succubus queen Mechanut. This was her first battle after waking up. As the daughter of the succubus queen Mechanut, the competition within the Sister of Glory was also very fierce. What Cristiana wanted to do most now was to find a way to hit Yinagu, the Gnoll King, and please her mother, the succubus queen, and strive for a status far higher than other sisters. Behind her was a black army of demons. There were always demons in the Abyss who liked to despise succubus, but these people would always pay the price. The composition of the succubus army was very complicated because they had a strong attraction to any demon. Only less than 1/3 of the demon army were succubus, and the rest were servants drawn and enslaved by the succubus. Mechanut controlled a large number of other demons, and even the demonic Abyss I could not resist her charm. Behind the demon army was a huge beholder. It was the beholder, the servant of the succubus queen Mechanut. This powerful beholder would not participate in the battle. It was only responsible for telling the succubus queen everything it saw. Mechanut's eyes were watching here. She was very interested in how the daughter she had just created would defeat the Gnoll army and please her mother. Demons reproduced very quickly. As one of the most powerful demon lords in the Abyss, the succubus queen Mechanut did not care about the consumption of the demon army. As long as she wanted, she could quickly re-enslave a group of such cannon fodder. Chaotic wars were the main theme of the bottomless Abyss. Only through cruel wars could she nurture true elites. On this point, even her daughter was the same. The weak among the Sister of Glory would only be eliminated. In the distance of Cristiana was an ancient river. That was the Styx. The Styx flowed in many plains of the Abyss. Its tributaries were like tree trunks that could help demons reach many places. It was just that the ferryman on the Styx was not very easy to talk to. Cristiana had very few memories of the past. Her clearest memory was when she was on the Styx. She remembered that she had drifted in the Styx for a long time. The turbid river water had seeped into her soul and made her forget too much. She was only left with a little bit of vague memory. Chapter 491. It was said that the memory before death was the clearest. Unfortunately, Cristiana only remembered a vague shadow now. As a new Sister of Glory, she did not care too much about her past. Now succubus's natural desire for control made her want to gain more power. Pleasing her mother, the Queen of Succubus, Mechanut was her most important thing, because if she could not prove her value, she would become her mother's plaything. The Queen of Succubus had always been open to men and women. She had a morbid pursuit of beautiful things. Prove yourself and you can get power, status, and freedom because Mechanut also regarded Succubus as her own child. She loved Succubus more than any demon and allowed them to be occasionally capricious and naughty. There was a passage that said, "The Succubus Queen Mechanut's favorite servant is naturally Succubus." Since becoming the Queen of Succubus, Mechanut has had a special favor for succubus. Even if some succubus often disobey her wishes, this favor has not changed. For Mechanut's strange logical thinking, these capricious succubus are just born from their nature. Only some particularly rare succubus, such as the out-of-favor lady living in Sigil City, are really out of the love of the succubus queen. If there is anything in the multiverse that can make Mechanut really sad, then there is no doubt that it is these lost children. It was interesting to say. Many of those demon lords who were terrifying, evil, and chaotic in the eyes of mortals were great and noble existences in their own races. For example, Yeenagu, the king of Gnolls, struggled all his life for the rise of the Gnolls and successfully built a kingdom belonging to the Gnolls in the bottomless abyss, getting rid of thousands of years of slavery. Another example was Mechanut, the queen of succubus. Now the status of succubus in the bottomless abyss had changed from a kind of sex slave to a powerful ruling class, which was entirely supported by her alone. Her love for succubus could be said to be no less than the pity of other gods for their believers. Without the rise of Mechanut, the succubus queen, there would be no succubus in the bottomless abyss today. Cridiana's reverie was interrupted by a slight noise. The corners of her mouth curled into a contemptuous smile. Her bewitching face was filled with a seductive expression. Her figure disappeared from the spot in an instant. Then she brandished the thorny whip with metal barbs in her hand. Accompanied by a blood-curdling scream, a Gnoll lurker was pulled out from the shadows. Soul gaze. The beauty of coquettish beauty. As the daughter of the succubus queen, Mechanut, Cridiana was born with the blasphemous beauty ability, which permanently strengthened her charm. Spirit gaze, could see through the hearts of enemies weaker than her. Coupled with the bewitching beauty that the Radiance Nun was born with, any enemy whose will couldn't pass her charm immunity test would directly fall into her control. The Gnoll lurker's expression was infatuated, even though a cruel smile appeared at the corner of Cridiana's mouth. She once again waved the thorny whip on its body. The enemy in front of her was motionless. It was as if the long whip with metal barbs could only bring great pleasure to it. It stood in place without any resistance and was whipped to death by her. When the strength reached the level of the Radiance Nun, her charm ability could directly deceive the senses of the target. Pain turned into pleasure. Knowing that at the moment of death, all the accumulated pain would erupt in an instant. Then the Gnoll scout who died under her whip finally showed a horrifying expression on his face. How dare you send such a waste? Cridiana gently shook the long whip, and it turned into a belt wrapped around her slender waist. As the advanced form of the high-level succubus, demon assimilation, the glorious nun was born with the combat power of the legendary level. In addition to the various abilities of the succubus, the Radiance Nun was born as a priest with a profession level of 9 or above. No one knew where their magic came from. Maybe it was from the succubus queen, or maybe it was from the power of the bottomless abyss. The powerful Radiance Nun could even fight against the demon lord. Because the succubus lord of the bottomless abyss, Red Shroud, was the daughter of the succubus queen Mechanut. In terms of potential, the Radiance Nun was not much worse than the higher demons. The demon lord liked pure souls. Because pure souls could allow them to directly extract power to create powerful demons. This kind of demon might be born with legendary strength. Whether it was the starting point or the growth rate, it was far higher than other demons. Come on. Cridiana stood on the bloody ground. Under her feet was a pile of bones. Her metal-forged boots were still stained with minced meat. Her seemingly exposed metal armor did not weaken her defensive ability at all. She looked at the Gnoll plains in the distance and murmured, "Let this be the first battle of my rise. I want to prove to my mother that I am no worse than the other sisters. Cridiana, I will become a powerful demon lord." The Black Strait was dead silent. Soren waved his hand to signal the fleet to stop here, and then issued a summon. A huge shadow gradually emerged from the bottom of the sea, and the huge body of the mutant killer whale gradually approached from a distance. Soren did not bring others this time because at this stage of the impending ascension, it was very likely that others would test his lair. Therefore he must let Gloria and the others stay in the base camp. Now that Soren was half a step away from becoming a god, even if he faced a false god, his chances of winning were quite high. This time he alone was enough to go to the treasure island. You all stay here. Soren slowly pulled out his curved sword, icing death, and then jumped and landed on the huge body of the mutant killer whale. He stood on the head of the mutant killer whale and gently stroked the pet's back. Then he dived into the sea with the mutant killer whale. Deep sea lurker, mutant sea monster, huge body, Grade 5. Challenge rating 18. Monster level 24 has spell-like abilities. Highest and lowest attributes 35, lowest attributes 15, total attribute value 100 to 120 points. Special abilities: Tentacle Entanglement, Multi-Attack, Huge Body, Mutant Sea Monster, Limb Regeneration, Devour. Challenge difficulty, A+. Although there was no specific information about the giant octopus monster, Soren still remembered its general abilities. The multi-attack of the tentacles, the ability to regenerate itself, the terrible vitality brought by the huge body, and some kind of ability to devour other species to further mutate and strengthen. To deal with such a monster, no matter how many people below the legendary level came, they would all die. The sea shook. The mutant killer whale was also a sea monster, and its aura quickly alarmed the behemoth in the depths of the strait. The territorial conflict of this kind of sea monster was very fierce. The monster lurking here did not hesitate to show up and was ready to teach the enemy who dared to break into its territory a lesson. Shadow hide. Soren's figure disappeared into the sea. The mutant killer whale made a dull roar and rushed directly to the huge tentacles stretched out in the darkness. The sea was violently churning. The confrontation between the two sea monsters set off huge waves on the sea. Fortunately, the fleet was not close to here or they would all be overturned. Shadow leap. Soren quickly sneaked deeper into the sea. The huge body of the mutant killer whale completely covered his trace. The giant octopus monster only thought about how to defeat the other sea monster in front of it. A huge mass of meat appeared in Soren's sight. The surrounding sea became turbid, and he could vaguely see the terrible teeth. The amazing mouth was enough to swallow a big ship. Although the monster in front of him was a little smaller than the son of Dagon that Soren had seen, it was not too far away. Soren was looking for a fatal weakness. The mutant killer whale was entangled by a huge tentacle. Although it was much stronger now, it still could not gain the upper hand against such a huge sea monster. Here it is. Soren's figure suddenly jumped out, and then appeared above the head of the giant octopus monster. Greater haste. In an instant, countless cold sword lights appeared, and Soren's figure was like a sharp sword piercing directly into the huge head of the octopus monster. Then his whole body broke through the muscles and bones all the way into the enemy's skull. Plop. The huge tentacles fell weakly, and Soren jumped out of the head of the giant octopus. He looked coldly at the sea monster in front of him and ordered the mutant killer whale next to him, "Eat it up. Don't leave anything behind." Flesh and blood splattered. The mutant killer whale opened its bloody mouth and devoured wildly. This giant octopus monster was 10 times bigger than it. It estimated that it would take a long time to eat it up. Soren's figure flew toward the sea. As an existence that was about to become a god, it was not difficult for him to deal with such a mortal creature. Perhaps many mortals thought that the gods were just SOSO. A powerful legendary wizard could challenge the gods and even be on par with the weak gods. But in fact, this was just the delusion of mortals. Most of the time, they couldn't even defeat the incarnation of the gods, let alone the true body of the gods. The only most successful deicide was the most powerful arcanist of the Thorium Age, Cassus. Although he killed the first-generation goddess of magic with the help of a spell, he self-destructed because he couldn't bear the huge power. The glorious Thorium Age of Arcana ended because of this. The second generation of the goddess of magic was resurrected in her daughter's body. Just to kill a god with great divine power, she lost the most powerful and talented arcanist in history, as well as a glorious arcane civilization that also had a floating city. This kind of price was really too heavy. Soren's crushing of mortals was taking shape. When the divine power was further gathered, there would be fewer and fewer mortals that could threaten him, even legendary wizards. The endless river of time. Civilizations rose and fell over and over again. Countless legendary masters rose and fell. The glorious arcane civilization only had some liches left, but the gods were still high above. Soren didn't know what happened in history, but he knew that only the gods were qualified to participate in the next competition. The most chaotic era in the history of the multiverse. It was also the era full of opportunities in history. And when the unprecedented chaos ended, the era of order would also come. At that time, it would be difficult to have the opportunity to kill the gods. Soren's figure returned to the warship. He glanced at the bloody sea in front of him. It would take a long time for the mutant killer whale to swallow this supergiant sea monster, so he directly ordered, "Set sail." The giant sea beast that had once trapped many people was easily killed by him. Unknowingly, Soren also stood at a higher starting point than the peak of the past. When he had such power, the Avatar crisis had already ended, and the gods had already returned to their kingdoms. He had many powerful abilities, but he lost the opportunity because at that time, the success rate of mortals challenging the weak gods was infinitely close to zero. As long as he could use the power of his kingdom, even the weakest god could fight against a group of legendary masters. Because he had a kingdom behind him. Soren looked at the sea in front of him. Now he was only one step away from becoming a god. After taking down the treasure island, he could directly enter the pantheon as a true god. Chapter 492. Waves were brewing under the calm sea. Starting from the Black Canyon to the treasure island, the danger level of the sea increased exponentially. Even the other sea creatures wouldn't easily set foot in this place. With Soren's current ability, he could easily feel the energy waves from the bottom of the sea. It was a radiation that covered a large area. There might be a whirlpool in this area, but he wasn't sure how it was formed. Sometimes, a huge whirlpool would appear and suck everything nearby into the depths of the sea. Currently, he didn't know what was going on inside the whirlpool. Even the gods wouldn't easily set foot in it. He could only guess that it was related to the ruins at the bottom of the sea. There was an underwater volcano near the treasure island. Although this island had a lot of wealth, the geographical environment was much worse than Moto. Perhaps only the natives could live here happily. The volcano didn't show any signs of eruption yet, and it wasn't clear if it would erupt in the future. However, some adventurers had done research and determined that this was probably an active volcano that would erupt once every 100 years or so. Soren led the fleet along the route in his memory for a day. A huge island appeared in his line of sight. There was a lush primeval forest on it. This island was more than 10 times larger than Moto. It was about 2/3 the size of Taiwan Island. Large islands like this were scattered around this area. Many of them were left behind from the time when the land sank. The largest island nearby was about 200,000 square kilometers in area. Stop. Soren stared at the island in front of him. A cold light appeared in his eyes. He was a predator on this trip to the treasure island. He had to adjust his attitude so that it wouldn't affect his judgment. Because the island was very large, Soren could only choose a place to land. There was no natural harbor here. In the past, the adventurers had built a harbor, so it wasn't convenient for the fleet to land directly. Roar. The low roar of a beast could be heard. The forest far away from the treasure island was crooked. Soren only needed to take a glance to know his approximate location. This was the territory of the top-armed King Kong. The dangerous creatures entrenched in the sea weren't just the natives, spirits, and mutated creatures. There were also creatures that were born with great power. The Tongbi gorilla was one of the most dangerous creatures on Treasure Island. If you didn't provoke them, these silverback gorillas with their monstrous strength were easy to get along with. However, if you accidentally angered these behemoths, they would definitely become terrifying existences. An adult Tongbi gorilla could weigh more than 2 tons. They had a body of steel and iron, and their huge fists could break mountains and crush rocks with their bare hands. The mutated environment of the outer islands had further strengthened these terrifying fellows. Sometimes they could even be seen clashing head-on with demigod spirits. The Tongbi gorilla was also one of the masters of Treasure Island. Bottomless Abyss, 90th floor. Due to the unique environment of the abyss, there would occasionally be some good landforms. The 90th floor of the abyss was a plain similar to a tropical rainforest. The demon lord here was called Balgra, and it was an enormous gorilla. Treasure Island's Tongbi gorilla had always been suspected to be related to this demon lord. This was because the giant gorillas here all had good intelligence. It was impossible for an ordinary creature of the material plane to be born with a creature level close to level 10. Another dangerous creature on Treasure Island was the slime, ooze monster. On the main road, slime had become very rare. The reason for this was unknown, but traces of slime could be seen in the outer islands. The slime here was more troublesome. They were all relatively dangerous creatures. Due to their racial characteristics, the slime's ability to mutate was extremely high. The harsher the environment, the more powerful they were, the more powerful they would be. Occupying the side of Treasure Island were the demon slime. It was a swampy area, and basically didn't conflict with Soren's goal. The slime here served the demon lord of the 222nd floor of the abyss, the faceless king, Julix. This floor was also called the slime hell. The demon slime that occupied the swampy area served the demon lord of the abyss. They should be the faceless king as few believers in the material plane. Finally, Treasure Island had the most indigenous people. There were many indigenous tribes here, and their scale was also relatively large. Many of them served the demigod spirits. Soren's goal was these indigenous people. The servants of the faceless king rarely left the swampy area. As long as the top-armed King Kong didn't enter their territory, there would be no problem. These monsters had a large appetite and attached great importance to their territory. Other than that, there weren't any particularly dangerous enemies on Treasure Island. Fly. As the fleet docked nearby, Soren's figure also flew up. When he rose hundreds of meters into the air, Soren saw the figure of a Quetzalcoatlus. These dragon subspecies were distributed on many islands and could be seen almost everywhere. However, the Quetzalcoatlus's scale was very small. At most, there were dozens of them gathered together. For Soren, they were not a threat at all. Under his feet was a dense jungle. He could see broken trees and huge footprints on the ground. The figure of the top-armed King Kong was easy to recognize. Their weight of nearly 2 tons made them completely shake when they moved in groups. They were the overlords of the south of the island. Even the indigenous people were not willing to provoke them. Flying all the way along the coast, the ground gradually opened up. There was a very lush grassland. There were many velociraptors living here. Dinosaurs had been active in overseas areas, and occasionally there were figures similar to Tyrannosaurus rex. Father of dinosaurs, Atau. This god with great divine power was once active in the material plane. Now there were few traces of his believers. No one knew if they disappeared in the long river of history or went to other planes. The velociraptors came and went like the wind on the grassland. They hunted all the creatures they could kill. Indigenous people were the most common prey, but occasionally they would be tamed. The tamed velociraptors would generally have a bird feather on their heads. The indigenous tribes regarded them as battle aids, but the number of domesticated velociraptors had always been small because they needed to consume a lot of meat. After passing through the endless tropical forest, they could see a swamp that was not small in size. There was a supergiant slime with a challenge rating of about 20 here. Because of its own characteristics, this monster was very difficult to kill, so no one killed it until the end of the Avatar crisis. There were distributed rivers inside the Treasure Island, and the central river was the territory of the piranhas. There were huge electric eels near the southwest. This mutant creature could release terrible electric currents, and the strength was equivalent to the 5th or 6th circle spells. It was also something that no one dared to provoke. As for those mutant plants, there was nothing to talk about. They were too common overseas. As long as one was careful not to get close to them. That was the general situation of the Treasure Island. In terms of the environment, it was much worse than the city of Motor, so it would take a long time for Soren to develop it. The most important thing was to take down those open-air gold mines first. About 50 kilometers away from the current coastline, there was a large indigenous tribe. There was a relatively small river next to the tribe. Gold sand could be directly extracted from this river. Half a day passed in the blink of an eye. Soren flew on the island for a long time and encountered a Quetzalcoatlus. He was bored and teased it. The aura of the gods scared it so much that it almost fell from the sky. In the evening, after returning to the warship, Soren immediately took out a piece of white paper, and then picked up a pen and quickly drew on it. He had never been a rash person. If he rushed to the island with only the memory of the past, he was afraid that at least half of the elites brought by Soren would die. He flew on the Treasure Island for so long today just to memorize the topographic map of the island. He had the ability to remember everything he saw. Soren quickly drew the outline of a map, then marked the terrain of each area, and then marked the distribution of all kinds of creatures, including the indigenous tribes he saw. Then he marked the convenient landing places near the island. From the map, he found the safest route that would not alarm other dangerous creatures and would not pass through their territory. Finally, he began to think about tomorrow's battle plan. He planned and acted. In a dangerous place like the sea, if he did not make more preparations, even Soren would not be able to bear the casualties. The next day, the fleet continued to move forward for about 10 kilometers and then landed in front of a beach. A group of elite pirates came down from the deck, followed by the pirate leaders brought by Soren. They were Scarface, Cyclops, and Giant. This time, Soren only brought over 2,000 people. But all of them were elite pirates. Whether it was their strength or their equipment, they were all first class. They were the core of Soren's combat power that he had accumulated for so long. If he were to risk it all here, he was afraid that it would really hurt his muscles and bones. All troops on standby. Soren glanced at the gathered elite pirates and said in a deep voice, "Leave a group of people here to guard. Rogues, follow me to explore the path. The rest of you get ready for battle." In terms of distance, this place was not far from the indigenous tribes. Soren was not sure if they had discovered his fleet. Now it was time to test his strength. Defeating an indigenous tribe was not a big deal at all. The goal was to reduce the casualties to the minimum. Moreover, what Soren wanted was not simply to destroy the enemy, but to capture as many captives and slaves as possible. In the end, the workers of the gold mine would have to find a way from these indigenous people. Otherwise, it would be too troublesome to transport people from afar to mine the gold. To achieve this goal, Soren was afraid that he would have to crush the indigenous people's faith and fighting spirit with a crushing force. Chapter 493. Under the Shadows. Figures entered the shadows, and these slender rogues quickly disappeared in front of people. More than half of the rogues brought by Soren were half-elves. The church of the original god of half-elves and rogues naturally had more than just a few priests left. In fact, there was a special department inside the church, which had a large number of middle-grade and high-grade rogues. Unfortunately, there were very few rogues who could cross the threshold of the legendary realm. It was more difficult for them to enter the realm of legends than warriors. So even if the church served the rogue clergy, the highest professional level rogue was only a level 18 rogue. This was mainly because the original god of half-elves and rogues was too weak. It was difficult for a god with weak divine power to give much power, and he had been severely injured by the Shadow Lord. Many rogues even became priests of 1 or 2 levels. No one knew if he had a brain cramp to make the church make such a decision. With the limitations of this era, many gods' vision was not so high. No enemies. Unknown creatures found. Everyone be careful. Ah. Get ready to fight. Get ready to fight. It's a mutant plant. Be careful of those vines. Figures spread out and carefully detected the nearby terrain, but soon there were screams, and Soren disappeared in an instant. Clang. A cold light flashed and Soren's figure was like a gust of wind. In the blink of an eye, a strange mutant vine was cut into pieces. My lord. The half-elven rogue who was injured by the entanglement fell to the ground and knelt on one knee in front of Soren. Soren glanced at him, waved his hand and ordered, "Take him down for treatment. Everyone else be careful. There are many mutant plants here." The elite pirates also began to move. There was basically no road in the dense jungle here. They could only clear one by themselves. Behind the team were some longbow archers. The half-elves were full of excellent archers. But Soren didn't bring many because the pirates' fighting style originally included long-range weapons such as flying axes, throwing knives, sleeve arrows, crossbows, and so on. Their fighting skills were far better than the soldiers who were systematically trained, and their equipment was naturally more flexible and varied. A huge footprint appeared on the ground. Many parts of the island were occupied. Soren saw that the footprints had 3 legs which looked like they were left behind by some kind of dinosaur, but they could also belong to other creatures. The group didn't stop and soon passed through this place. At the other side, about 10 kilometers away from Soren, a group of indigenous people wearing simple clothes with oil paint were hunting. Stop. Suddenly, the leader of the indigenous warriors with an old and gloomy face waved his hand to signal the others to stop. The village was surrounded by towering wooden walls, nearly 1 or 2 meters thick, which seemed to be to guard against some monsters with terrible power. There were arrow towers on all sides of the wooden walls, and there were warriors on guard. A large number of slaves were working. If it were not for many places that were too rough and simple, perhaps there would be a large town here. The indigenous people liked the slavery system. The internal structure of any tribe was supported by many slaves. Dong dong dong. The strange sound of drums came from inside the tribe, and then there was a kind of frenzied shouting, accompanied by strange harsh syllables. In the center of the tribe, a group of priests with strange masks stood on the altar, and there was a dark red stone in front of them. Accompanied by the frenzied shouting of the tribe, a group of strong warriors escorted a group of captives. The captives were also indigenous people, but a little different from them was that the captives had white paint on their bodies, while these indigenous people had dark blue paint on their bodies. At #yen%, a strange sound of gibberish sounded. It sounded like they were singing something. When the shaman priest in front of them raised his hand, the black mass of aborigines knelt down and shouted a name. Sa. Oh. Si. This syllable, which was similar to the common language, should represent the name of something. Ah. A cruel smile appeared at the corner of the shaman priest's mouth. He took a dagger made of bone and came to the first captive. With a cold light, the captive's throat was cut open, and blood gushed out crazily, flowing along the rock and onto the altar. The crowd below suddenly went crazy. When the blood seeped into the surface of the altar, some kind of evil and strange energy also emerged, making all the indigenous people around show a frenzied, intoxicated, and greedy expression. Blood sacrifice. The most evil way of sacrifice for the indigenous people, using blood, killing, and death to worship some existences, and to please them and provide them with power. Looking at the dark red blood on the altar, no one knew how long such a ceremony had been held. This was the favorite of the evil gods. It was also the most violent and direct way to increase power. Most of the gods on the continent rejected it, and even many gods in the evil camp stopped this primitive way of sacrifice. The development of believers was much better than this way of relying on blood sacrifice. It was estimated that only the abyss demons were still addicted to the pleasure of killing in this blood sacrifice. The second captive was dragged out. This kind of sacrifice was often difficult to satisfy the evil gods. If they couldn't provide powerful sacrifices, then they had to rely on numbers to please the evil gods. Often, a bloody sacrifice would last for a long time. When it was late at night, torches would be lit all around, and then it would fall into a wild carnival after the ceremony. The indigenous people believed that mating at this time could produce strong offspring. These offspring would be blessed by the gods and have the power to make themselves violent. This kind of mating may last until dawn, until the tribe accumulated enough sacrifices for the next ceremony. The sky gradually darkened. It seemed that the number of sacrifices prepared this time was not much. After killing more than 10 captives, the shaman priest also brought out some imprisoned beasts. For these non-human sacrifices, a certain existence was obviously dissatisfied. Because an evil and gloomy aura spread, as if it was angry, making many people tremble. It was no longer a weak spirit. The spirit could only wait passively for the tribe's sacrifice, but it could take the initiative to ask the whole tribe to serve it. Every once in a while, a bloody sacrifice would be held to improve its power. A cold light appeared in the eyes of the old shaman priest, and then he ordered a few words in a deep voice. Soon there were cries and shouts. Strong indigenous warriors dragged some thin men and women out. They had the same oil paint as the other indigenous people, but all of them were thin and sallow. Accompanied by a cold light, the first slave's throat was cut. As the blood spilled over the entire altar, a strong consciousness suddenly showed a trace of satisfaction. Those indigenous people kneeling on the altar soon showed an excited and fanatical expression on their faces. A faint smile appeared on the old shaman's face. He could feel that his power was growing. Every time a bloody sacrifice was held, his strength would increase a little. This was the power given to him by the gods. In the darkness, silhouettes were rapidly approaching this place, and even further away there were warriors ready to go. Soren looked at the front. As an existence that was about to become a god, he could see the rich blood-red aura above the indigenous tribe, and the power fluctuations produced by some kind of ritual. Evil god. A chaotic and evil god. It was not certain whether it was a demigod or a false god, but it was certainly the most chaotic and evil thing. Chapter 494. The Principality of Rossard, King's City. As the night approached, everything in the palace became silent. Since the Duke of Red Dragon's wife took control of the place, many of the original nobles were stripped of their positions and returned to their hometown to farm. Now the entire power in the principality was controlled by her confidants. Although there were many people who were secretly dissatisfied with her, due to her powerful strength, no one dared to stand up against her openly. Especially in the period before the Avatar crisis, even the church was not willing to interfere too much with the secular world. After all, the Duke of Red Dragon's wife did not do anything to make the world angry. On the contrary, under her rule, the power of the Principality of Rossard rose sharply and suppressed the other nearby kingdoms. The Duke of Red Dragon's wife was very popular in the army. Maybe it was because of her amazing charm, or maybe it was because of her powerful personal strength. Of course, if she had not been seriously injured by Soren, her reputation in the army would have been even higher. Since she came to power, the Duke of Red Dragon's wife had won 3 consecutive victories. Unfortunately, these 3 victories were ended by Soren in the Battle of Raging Sand Island, and the Principality of Rossard's navy was almost completely wiped out. Now, in the quiet side hall, all the palace guards had retreated, and only the Duke of Red Dragon's wife was left in the empty hall. Haha! A strange and frivolous laughter rang out. Then a hazy figure appeared. In the end, it turned into a charming and seductive woman. In terms of appearance, she was devastatingly beautiful and possessed a charm that was close to that of a high-level succubus. But if you looked carefully, you could see that she was not a succubus but a demon from the Bator Inferno. A high-pleasure demon. They were the advanced form of the lustful demons, with the blood of the fallen angels, and were the backbone of the Bator Inferno. These pleasure demons were obsessed with luring mortals into depravity, which was equivalent to the simple and crude succubus. The demons paid more attention to the depravity of the soul. They would brew for a long time and then reap the fruit at the last moment. My dear Kalian. A seductive smile appeared on the pleasure demon's face. Her plump red lips parted slightly as she said, "It seems like we haven't met in a long time. I really do miss your set." At this point, she stuck out her tongue and licked the corner of her mouth, as if she was silently seducing him. The Duke of Red Dragon's wife didn't look too good. She looked coldly at the pleasure devil and said in a deep voice, "Enough. I have provided you with enough souls. Don't even think about taking advantage of me, or don't blame me for being ruthless." Ah! Frivolous laughter rang out as the pleasure demon approached with graceful cat-like steps. She placed her bright red lips next to the Duke of Red Dragon's wife's ear and slowly said, "Don't be so heartless. I still miss the happy times I spent with you. You were very happy at that time too. Isn't that so?" The Duke of Red Dragon's wife's plump chest heaved up and down. Her face was slightly red, but her expression was still cold. She said in a deep voice, "Speak. What exactly do you want?" The pleasure demon playfully stuck out her tongue and suddenly licked the earlobe of the Duke of Red Dragon's wife. Then she giggled and dodged. She said softly, "Don't be so cold. I heard that you have encountered some trouble recently, so I specially came to help you." The Duke of Red Dragon's wife turned around in confusion. When the pleasure demon licked her earlobe, her body trembled, but she quickly calmed down. She said in a deep voice, "Help me? What do you want?" There was no free lunch in this world. If a demon wanted to give you something, he would naturally take it from you. Yes. The pleasure demon tilted her head and looked at the Duke of Red Dragon's wife with sparkling eyes. As the most seductive demon in the Bator Inferno, her charm couldn't be resisted even by females. She smiled and said, "More outstanding souls. Although you have provided a lot of them, they are all lowly males. The males in your family have already been blinded by lust. Although they have good talent, they are too weak. They are like flowers in a greenhouse. This is a perverted family. Even a demon would be amazed by their depraved lust. Is this how the warlock families in the mortal world play?" The Duke of Red Dragon's wife's face turned ashen. She angrily rebuked, "Enough." But an invisible wave of air wreaked havoc. A pair of blood-red dragon wings appeared behind her. Ah! The pleasure demon had a surprised and frightened expression. However, she approached with light steps. She didn't seem to be afraid at all. She exhaled and said, "My dear Karina, don't be so angry. Didn't I help you control this family? You can do whatever you want. Isn't that right? Those guys' bloodlines taste pretty good, right? What a bunch of stupid mortals. They want to rely on the bloodlines of their close relatives to give birth to outstanding descendants, but they don't understand that only the strong can nurture true experts." All right. Don't be angry anymore. I came this time with a gift for you. Maybe you will like it. As for the reward, I think we can wait for a while. But you don't mind talking to me tonight, right? The pleasure demon stuck out her tongue and licked her lips. A strange smile appeared on her charming face. The Duke of Red Dragon's wife trembled. She turned around and looked at the pleasure demon with an ice-cold gaze. Demons love to play with minds. They would never be as simple and violent as demons. The pleasure demon turned around and walked behind the Duke of Red Dragon's wife. She leaned her full chest against her back and gently rubbed it. Her slender white hand had already reached under the Duke of Red Dragon's wizard robe. Instantly, the Duke of Red Dragon's wife trembled. Her face flushed red, and her eyes seemed to be a little hollow for a moment. The pleasure demon's voice was like a voice from hell. She gently twisted her body and stuck out her tongue to suck on the Duke of Red Dragon's wife's earlobe. She whispered with a strange voice, "Your mouth says no, but your body is very obedient. My dear Karina, do you still remember the happy time we spent together? Ah, Treasure Island." Soren stared coldly at the indigenous tribe in front of him. Using blood sacrifice to worship the gods was like drinking poison to quench one's thirst. The longer it went, the greater the thirst of the gods. Once a year became once a month. In the end, the entire tribe was dragged into a quagmire. Gods who transformed in this way were basically evil false gods. Their madness was like the abyss demons. Blood completely destroyed their minds. Under the perception of the gods, at the moment when the sacrifice reached the highest point, Soren ordered in a deep voice, "All the warriors must not be left alive." He needed slaves, not warriors. Warriors were harder to control, so killing them was the simplest and most violent way. Following Soren's order, figures rushed forward, and he himself disappeared into the night. Plop. Dull sounds of people falling to the ground were heard. Soren's figure appeared one after another like a ghost. Every time he appeared, he took the lives of several indigenous warriors. The arrow tower was quickly emptied, and the guards could not resist at all. The gate was opened by the rogues, and the elite pirates outside quickly rushed in. Frenzied shouts came from the front, and the fanatical sacrifice completely covered all this. This group of indigenous people were all addicted to some kind of emotion. However, the evil god they worshipped seemed to feel something, and a weak wave shrouded here in an instant. The connection between the gods. At the moment when Soren made his move, the other party also noticed his trace. However, as an evil god born from souls, he was more restricted than Soren in many aspects. Shadow leap. Greater haste. Soren's figure rushed at an amazing speed, and in an instant he activated the Lich Ring +5, and then directly appeared near the altar, stabbing the indigenous shaman who presided over the sacrifice. Puchi. As blood gushed out, the old indigenous shaman's body stiffened. He looked at the blade that pierced through his heart in a daze. At this time, the sound of fighting came from outside, and the indigenous people who were addicted to the sacrifice woke up from a dream. You're tuning in to the Han Lee's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.